From the silent steps of the Puritans, searching for freedom on unknown shores, to the thundering debates of Federalists and Anti-Federalists, from the Civil War's painful rifts to the global shifts of 2 world wars. We've traveled a long road together in this series, uncovering the intricate dance of faith, culture, and politics that birthed the America we know today. In this episode, we'll connect the centuries, moments, and decisions to uncover the unseen thread weaving our nation's story. Are you ready to see the tapestry in full? To see how all of these moments will shift and form into what America's politics and culture is today? Well, get ready to be thrusted through history today as we reveal the truth behind why Republicans and Democrats have become so jaded to one another and how they shifted from their initial stances on today's groovy historical quarrel. Welcome back to Historical Quarrels, the most historicaliest and quarreliest show out there. I am your host, Tyler Eckhart, and you are in for a treat today. Today, we will be continuing where we left off from the Civil War and get into the modern era here in America, and as close to today's time as I will allow myself to get, since this is primarily a history comedy show, and I consider history to be anything Vietnam era and back. So Vietnam War and back, essentially. I know most historians will argue and say it's like 30 years, but I'm more of the idea that it's like 50 to 60 years back. It's history is there's still a lot of stuff, from the 80s and from the 90s that we don't know enough about and have not really studied, and I wouldn't call that complete history yet, but for today we'll get pretty close to the modern times, to like 2020. So, anyways, big thank you to everyone that has been sharing the show and leaving reviews. It is very appreciated. Seriously, I want to thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. It means a lot. If you are new and just listening, welcome to the show. I should warn you, it is very NSFW, and I will say, some very inciting things, stuff that will piss you off maybe, or piss certain types of people off, just for the fun of it. Because I am secretly a chaos demon, sent from the warp to sow discord by building up an audience through podcasting and getting people to listen to it. So if you want to join me and spread as much chaos as possible, please leave a review and share the show with everyone you know, because that's the only way to keep the discord and the chaos going. Especially if you share it with anyone that's over the age of 70, so I can finally get my first bit of hate mail from someone. I've yet to receive like just a "fuck you, Tyler" email, and I think that'd be kind of funny. I'd love to have that. It'd be great. The email for that, by the way, if you do want to send some hate mail, and normal mail as well, is historicalquarrels@gmail.com, just so you know. Couple of quick announcements before we start today's episode. Number one, I'm working on getting a full video setup for all shows I'm currently doing. This will hopefully be done by the end of the year, but who knows? The tricky part right now is getting the audio and video to sync, which I know a few ways to do that. I'm just looking for like the best and easiest way to edit both audio and video together, since I don't have a producer or an editor right now. I mean, the show's not really necessarily a moneymaker. It's more of like it's here. It's a fun show, and it's here. And it's for your ear holes to enjoy. But maybe once it gets bigger, I can look at getting that. That'd be cool. Second, I'm planning on redoing the website and or building my own website for the show. So the website will host all of our shows here at Down Bad Productions, is what we're calling the production company for our shows. And once we get merch ready, we will sell from the website as well, unless we need to sell off one of the distributors' websites, in which case we'll just link their websites on our site. So, and lastly, I really want to start jelking more. I'm interested in learning more about it. So I wanted to ask the audience, so anyone with advice on jelqing, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know the easiest and least painful way to begin the process of that. I got to figure that out soon. So anyways, for today's episode, we will be starting off in the 1870s, then covering political and world events that would shape the Democratic and Republican parties and shift their alignments on what they would view as important. These events will include a couple of notable wars that we will not dive too deeply into, as they kind of each deserve their own episodes, and the civil rights movement, and a certain president who is really into water sports and gates, as they're very important. Also, FDR is important in this. So, as well as a few more modern events that have happened recently that has caused more of a divide. That'll be kind of talked about at the very end of the episode, kind of after I wrap up the episode. I'll give my thoughts and kind of go over some more, modern issues, stuff that's happened in the past couple of years that I think has caused more of a rift in our society. I'll just talk about it, give my opinion on it. And if you don't want to listen to my opinion on it, skip the end of the episode. Good majority of this will be less opinion based and more just facts. I will make jokes that will kind of hint at my opinion, but this is more, hey, this is what happened and this is how it happened for today's episode. Also, there isn't going to be an overarching plot line with people's lives today, so that format will be taking a break, but returning next week. So with that out of the way, let's get political and begin today's historical quarrel. You are listening to Historical Quarrels. So, to begin today's episode, we're going to quickly go over the ratification of the 15th Amendment again, but this time from a different perspective. So, in 1870, the United States ratified the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, a transformative piece of legislation in the nation's history, securing a measure of political agency for African American men after centuries of disenfranchisement. I should mention men, because it was just for the men. It was a boys' club. No vaginas allowed for a little bit. Sorry, ladies. This moment was a significant step in the arduous journey toward civil rights and suffrage. A journey that began in earnest with the end of the Civil War and the abolition of slavery. The text of the amendment was clear and unequivocal. The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. But laws only mean shit if people choose to live by them. When you have enough people who don't give a fuck about a law, it will be ignored. A big example of that for me would be when I was a kid. I remember that the seatbelt law in Washington became mandatory for passengers. I was told it was mandatory since 1986. And for basically 20 years, no one in my small town gave two fucks about that law. And we would ride around without them all the time like dumbasses. And I say dumbasses because, that's what we were doing. We were being stupid. We shouldn't have done that. It was risking our lives needlessly. I also remember that I would ride in the back of my uncle's trucks, and cops would see us, didn't really give a shit at all. Because the culture for the town was that it didn't care about the seatbelt law or about how you got transported. They didn't give two fucks about it. So the police weren't going to enforce it because they didn't want to, have it be enforced on them. It wasn't until enough accidents happened and then fines were imposed. So it was a way to make money. And as a way to give people tickets. I think in our town there was a mandatory hey, you had to report a certain amount in a month or something. I can't remember what it exactly was. But anyways, after that happened, then everyone in our town gave a shit, and eventually everyone started wearing seatbelts after it impacted them, and they got negative consequences from it. Whether that was fines or a serious accident occurring. So essentially what happened in the southern states was this same concept, but for racism, which is obviously much, much worse. Bad analogy, really, but it's one that I feel like a lot of people can kind of understand. They might, you guys might have had certain laws in towns, also in Washington, everyone smoked weed. Everyone knew everyone had weed, but nobody would go after each other. It's just one of those things, yes, it's against the law federally, But over here in my small town, we don't give a fuck what the federal government says. And the feds aren't going to come bust down my door because they're just not. They got other shit to deal with. Anyways, the push for the amendment came on the heels of the Civil War and the emancipation of enslaved people. The Republican Party of the era, the Party of Lincoln, had aligned itself with the abolitionist cause and the fight against the Confederate States. If you remember, they primarily did that because it was an image thing to keep Europe out of the Civil War. They wanted to make sure that France and England didn't support the southern states. Its leaders saw the 15th Amendment as a natural successor to the 13th, which abolished slavery, and the 14th, which granted citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. First-hand accounts from the period reflect the heated debates that the amendment sparked. Frederick motherfucking Douglass, the famed abolitionist, stated, "The Republican Party is the ship, all else is the sea." His support for the amendment was unequivocal, representing a larger hope for African Americans' full integration into society. Also, this is a big talking point for a lot of Republicans. They're like, Frederick Douglass was a Republican. He knew that the Republican Party had to last. And what they are blissfully ignoring and choosing not to mention is the fact that Nixon, as we'll go over later in this episode, and the Republicans decided to recruit disenfranchised Southern Democrats into the Republican Party to get their votes. And that would start happening in the I want to say the 1890s-ish because of a certain election that would happen. So, and we'll get into that more. Anyways. However, the Democrat Party of the time, particularly its southern wing, vehemently opposed the amendment. Many Democrats were former Confederates who had fought to preserve slavery and, even after the Civil War, worked to maintain white supremacy through black codes and other repressive measures. Because, can't have black people be better than you. Because really, they realized that black people were either just as good as them, if not better, in a lot of ways. And really, they were just better people than slave owners. Goddamn. It's not that hard to be better than a slave owner, though, because slave owners are just sacks of shit. So, yay. The ratification of the 15th Amendment marked a significant shift in the policy stances of both parties, a shift that would continue to evolve over the next century. Initially, African Americans, where they could exercise their new rights, overwhelmingly supported the Republican Party. The Party of Lincoln, quote, was seen as the party of emancipation, of the Union, and of civil rights. Yet, the promise of the 15th Amendment would be undermined in the following decades as states enacted Jim Crow laws, and the Supreme Court handed down decisions that permitted voting restrictions like literacy tests and poll taxes. These state-led initiatives effectively disenfranchised African American voters, particularly in the South. And the literacy test was because, most African Americans were fucking illiterate because they weren't allowed to get a good education. So it was an unfair way to essentially eliminate them from being able to vote. And then it would cause, certain classes of white people who also couldn't get a good education to be unable to vote. And it caused more issues. We won't get into that too as much, but it's interesting how that all worked out. Anyways, by the mid-20th century, the two major political party stances on civil rights and race began to shift. During the civil rights movement, it was largely Democrats, particularly Northern Democrats, who pushed forward key legislation, such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which we'll get in. We'll get into how that shift will break down. But so it's a big study. And then in 1876, so 6 years after that, really 1877, we have a compromise that happened. It's called the Compromise of 1877, but it started in 1876, just so you're aware. Anyways, it marked a critical juncture in American history, effectively ending the era of Reconstruction that had sought to rebuild the southern United States in the aftermath of the Civil War. The agreement, though never formalized in writing, had profound and long-lasting impacts on the political and social landscape of the nation, particularly in the South. In the presidential election of 1876, Republican Rutherford B. Hayes faced Democrat Samuel J. Tilden. It was one of the most contentious and disputed elections in American history. I am talking levels like beyond John Quincy Adams and motherfucking, my God, why am I forgetting his name? It's terrible of me. Me doing a history show, forgetting Thomas Jefferson. Anyways, and I would say this is almost on the level of Biden and Trump. Because Tilden won the popular vote, but 20 electoral votes from 4 states remained contested. There was a bunch of accusations of electoral fraud and voter suppression rampant. That's right. The voter suppression is insane. And the electoral fraud coming up, this long before Trump and Biden. Oh my God. Anyways, an electoral commission was established consisting of 5 senators, 5 House representatives, and 5 Supreme Court justices. The commission, in a party line vote, awarded all 20 disputed electoral votes to Hayes. But Democrats threatened to block the decision. But yeah, again, if it sounds familiar to you, it really should. This rhetoric of they must have cheated to get those votes has been used forever. Ever. I mean, think about it, between Bush and Man Bear Pig guy. No, global warming guy. Oh my God, what's his name? He was the vice president for a little bit. Al Gore. Yeah, Bush and Al Gore. And before that, just lots of different... This rhetoric is, been used, electoral fraud. I don't know. At some point, we either have to trust the system or we don't trust it, and we just have to redo the system. And I feel like enough people don't trust it that we need to figure out a better way to do it so more people can trust it. I feel like their vote matters now. Anyways, in this election, however, the idea that people cheated might have been true. For the Democrats, the Southern Democrats, they threatened black voters during this. South Carolina had an impossible 101% turnout of all eligible voters, despite the active black voter suppression that was going on, and some other bullshit. This election will for sure be a future episode down the line here, because it's super interesting. It would be really cool to dive way more into, but we do not have time today. So in a series of confidential meetings, leaders from both parties hashed out a compromise. Hayes would become president if he agreed to withdraw federal troops from southern states, effectively ending the military reinforcement of Reconstruction policies. A first-hand account by Republican insider James A. Garfield, later revealed in his diary, shows the tension. He said, "The Democrats yield the presidency, and we withdraw the troops, a solemn occasion, and I trust a wise choice." Hayes was privately reluctant, but accepted the deal, fearing a constitutional crisis or a second civil war. It's a very valid fear. A Southern Democrat, Senator J.R. Gordon, wrote to a colleague, "We regain control of our local affairs. It is a concession, but we must secure our rights and our society's preservation. I need to go tinkle now. Perhaps my drummer boy will be of assistance this time and help me, wiggle out the rest of my tinkle droppings." Sorry, if you're wondering where that drummer boy quote's coming from, go listen to the last episode. I found out something about drummer boys and Confederate soldiers. It was an amazing discovery that I made. So, this agreement, often seen as a betrayal by African Americans, resulted in an immediate and stark change in the South. With no federal oversight, Southern states quickly enacted laws that undid many of the advancements made during Reconstruction. Exactly like I was saying, if the feds aren't going to be involved, people who don't give a shit, if there's enough of them, will ignore federal laws. These laws that they made, the Southern states, curtailed African American rights, laying the groundwork for the Jim Crow era of segregation and disenfranchisement. Which sucks. But America really did need to avoid another civil war, else they were fucked. The economy was kind of going into the toilet during this time. So, the Compromise of 1877 was a turning point for the Republican Party. Once the champion of Reconstruction African American rights, the party began to shift its focus towards the industrial development and the economic expansion of the North and West. Meanwhile, the Democratic Party regained control of the South, establishing a political dominance that would remain unchallenged for nearly a century. That's right, like 100 fucking years. This is kind of what would begin Republicans' shift away from the cares of social injustice and championing civil rights completely, because they were like, we can go make money. Money's our way now. That's what Republicans should be known for, is making fucking money and helping the corporate elite. Hell yeah. But yeah, reflecting on the compromise, Frederick motherfucking Douglass lamented, "The liberties gained by thousands of brave souls have been betrayed." He was not wrong. Very poignant. The historian C. Van Woodward would later note the Compromise of 1877 did not resolve the race issue. It merely suppressed it. It put it out of white people's minds, is essentially what he's trying to say. It's like, it didn't solve the problem that they sought to solve with the 15th Amendment. And it just pissed off people. Well, it really more than pissed off. It fucked over people. So the Compromise underscored the ebb and flow of political power, right? And expediency, and signaled a realignment of priorities within the Republican Party. It was a reminder that the quest for civil rights in America was far from linear. It was shaped by negotiations and decisions often made behind closed doors, like this compromise, with lasting consequences for millions of lives. That's cool. It's cool that backdoor deals essentially could affect billions of people. It's great. I'm certain it still happens today in America. And then in 1887... we have the Interstate Commerce Act. The Interstate Commerce Act of 1877 represented a pivotal moment in the evolution of federal regulatory power, reflecting the increasing complexity of America's industrial economy. For the first time, the federal government took significant action to regulate private industry, an act that laid the groundwork for future government intervention in the marketplace. This landmark legislation emerged in response to widespread public outcry over railroad practices, which included rate discrimination and monopolistic tactics. That's right, there were railroad barons before there were ever oil barons. The railroads, essential to the country's economic lifeblood, had become powerful entities that many perceived as unchecked by law or competition. Swine monopoly. Railroads are still kind of on there, even though they seem like they're less of a big deal. They are a huge fucking deal. Okay, back in the day, that's how you got shit moved around. Imagine if in Monopoly, in order to get from one side of the board to the other, you had to own the railroad, no matter what. If you wanted to cross, let's say to go from Go to get to then the red or what is it? No, it's purple and yellow properties. If you did not own the railroad or nobody owned that railroad, you had to pay even if without landing on the spot, you had to pay $100 or $200. That's essentially how important that shit was. Monopoly needs to be updated to, fit for, I guess not less modern. Definitely not modern times, but to fit the 1800s again. Okay, so people can understand. Anyways, a lot of people perceived these railroad companies as unchecked by law or competition. There was actually one man by the name of Nathaniel Plainview, who was a big railroad tycoon, who would routinely visit different states and give this speech to each city he would start building in to gather new workers or to get the public on his side when it came to lawmakers. This is a way for him to kind of, get people to agree to let him build a railroad in their town. Let me go ahead and read you this letter here.
Ladies and gentlemen, now I have traveled over half our state to be here tonight. I couldn't get away sooner because my new rail line was coming in at Coyote Hills, and I had to see about it. That line is now operating at full capacity, and I'm here to speak to you. Now, I'm a railroad man. As anyone in this room will tell you, I have laid track and built stations across this great land. That's my occupation, my livelihood. There's a whole network of steel that has been laid down by my men, and I'm proud of the work they've done. Spanning this country, connecting towns, cities, and people. I like to think of myself as a railroad man. And as a railroad man, I hope you'll forgive me for plain speaking. I run a family business. This is my son and partner, HW. We're a family, and we're a company. That's my boy. I have a competition in me. I want no one else to succeed. I hate most people. That part of me is old-fashioned. I like to think of it as traditional. The very fabric of our enterprise is built on that competitive spirit. It's not just laying rails, but carving a legacy, inch by iron inch. I see this country as it could be, teeming with commerce, industry, bustling with the honest exertion of men, turning the wheels of innovation. My purpose here today is to find that potential in the land. You own and build a railway that serves you. You have the land, I have the means. Together, we can make something out of it. You see, I like to think of myself as an integrator. I take separate pieces, maybe a station here, a stretch of good grade there, and I put them together. I'm not just building a track, I'm building an empire. An empire that will make sure your goods get to market, your people travel safely, and that the future we talk about, that shining future of speed and steel, comes to pass. I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that if I say I'm going to run a line through your property, then that is exactly what I will do. I am a man who keeps his word. And let me tell you, when those trains start running, when you hear that whistle scream, and when you see those cars loaded up with goods, livestock, people, when you see the progress, you will think the day that you put your trust in me, Nathaniel Plainview, to lay the tracks that brought the train to you. Thank you.
First-hand accounts from farmers and business owners detailed grievances about the seemingly arbitrary and preferential rates set by railroad barons. These accounts fueled public support for change. One such account by a Midwestern farmer lamented, "The railmen set rates as they please, making kings of some and paupers of others with no recourse for the likes of us. Assholes." I don't know. He didn't say assholes, but as I was doing that voice, I was like, man, I bet he said assholes afterwards, just under his breath. Yeah, you do a voice sometimes, you're like, that character just needs to say something more. Anyways, the act established the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, the first federal agency designed to regulate economic activity. The commission was charged with ensuring reasonable and just rates, prohibiting the rate discrimination, and requiring that railroad companies publicize shipping rates. A Republican senator from Iowa, James W. McDill, involved in crafting the legislation, noted, "There is a principle here at stake, one of fair dealing and of justice. The common carriers of this country must be held to account." The act was a significant shift from the laissez-faire policies that had dominated the Gilded Age, a period where Republicans typically espoused minimal government intervention in business. They're like, hey, buddy, you can do whatever the fuck you want. And people loved that back then. However, the workers didn't. I should say the owners loved that back then because they could do whatever the fuck they wanted. With this act, the Republicans, led by President Grover Cleveland, took a step towards progressive reform, a path that the party would continue to follow, albeit inconsistently, into the early 20th century. And I'm talking pretty inconsistently. They kind of flip-flop on that quite a bit. The Democratic Party, traditionally aligned with states' rights and suspicious of federal encroachment, faced a conundrum with the act. Many Democrats recognized the necessity of the regulation given the public demand and clear evidence of abuse. A Democratic congressman, John H. Reagan of Texas, expressed support, asserting, "The time has come for the interests of the people to be afforded some measure of protection from the great powers of these railroad corporations." So, yeah, that's kind of cool. Democrats were like, we got to look out for the people. But, all people, not the other people. Fucking racist dicks. Anyways, this would cause one of the more prominent railroad barons to have this argument that would be recorded in a courtroom. It would be between Nathaniel Plainview and Thomas Fletcher. The courtroom transcript reads as follows. Thomas Fletcher would say, Mr. Plainview, you can't possibly believe that continuing without regulation is in the public's best interest. The Interstate Commerce Act ensures fair rates and practices. It's about equality and transparency. Daniel responds, fair rates, transparency. These words are the veil that hides the envy of men who can't do what men like me can. I've built these railroads from nothing, Mr. Fletcher. And then Thomas responds, you built an empire. I'll grant you that, but the empire cannot trample the people. These laws, and then Nathaniel interrupts him, saying, laws, snares, delusions, obstacles placed by men who have never laid a single track. You sit there with your papers and talk to me of fairness while my trains carry the lifeblood of this nation. And then Thomas calmly responded, apparently calmly is what they wrote, the nation you speak of is more than steel and steam, Mr. Plainview. It's people, and these people have given us the mandate to protect them from tyranny, economic or otherwise. Then Nathaniel says, tyranny. If giving people the means to move, trade, to prosper is tyranny, then yes, I'm a tyrant. The growth of this nation has been underpinned by the rail and risk takers, not by the hand of rigging bureaucrats. And then Thomas says, risk-taking should include gambling with the lives and livelihoods of the common man. Your railroads have changed the landscape, but without oversight, you decide the fate of farmers, merchants, and travelers. Is it not just they have a say through the government? And Nathaniel says, my interests have always aligned with the advancement of this nation. Your act assumes I am the enemy of progress, not its champion. And then Thomas says, no one is the enemy here, Mr. Plainview. The act is not a condemnation, but a covenant, a promise of fair play in a game that you have been winning for quite some time. It's time others had a chance to compete. And then Daniel says, competition is the crucible from which excellence is born. You begin to regulate, and you stifle the very spirit that the railroads you're so keen to control. And it goes on and on. It's mostly just an argument about like unchecked power and, them not being regulated and how it can cause, other aspects of society to crumble. It's interesting. So, go check it out if you ever want to, look at that. All right. So despite its good intentions, the Interstate Commerce Act had limitations in its effectiveness, largely due to the ICC's weak enforcement powers and the judiciary's narrow interpretation of the act. Nevertheless, it marked a significant step toward the progressive era and the expansion of federal regulation in American economic life. Which, in retrospect, it can be this Interstate Commerce Act can be seen as an early indicator of the evolving positions of the Democratic and Republican parties on the issue of federal economic intervention. While both parties wrestled with the balance between free enterprise and government oversight, the act definitely underscored a key moment in this trend of increasing federal engagement in regulating business practices for the public good. And there's going to be some back and forth here. So this step forward that they take is going to immediately take a step back, at least in the South, because in 1896, the Supreme Court decision in Plessy v. Ferguson represented a critical and regressive turning point in the American legal system's approach to race relations, which will allow people to definitely overstep the compromise of 1877 and the Interstate Commerce Act. It's going to cause some problems. Anyways, the ruling sanctioned segregation under the doctrine of separate but equal, which claimed that racially segregated facilities were permissible provided they were equivalent, a doctrine that was seldom, if ever, reflected in reality. It never really happened. It just said that, hey, we can separate people. Now go ahead and try to prove that it's not equivalent, which is a really hard thing to prove. This case originated in Louisiana, where Homer Plessy, a man of mixed racial heritage, deliberately challenged the state's Separate Car Act by refusing to leave a whites-only train car. Plessy's legal team, aiming to strike down segregation laws, argued that the act violated the 13th and 14th Amendments, which it did. First-hand accounts from the time describe Plessy's arrest and subsequent trial. John Howard Ferguson, the judge who initially heard Plessy's case and for whom the case is named, upheld the state law. Plessy's lawyer, Albion W. Tourget, decried the ruling, stating, "Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens." So, hey, that's the law shouldn't be looking at my color and deciding that shit, which he's right. It shouldn't. The Supreme Court's decision, however, penned by Justice Henry Billings Brown, upheld Ferguson's ruling. Justice Brown's opinion read, "The object of the 14th Amendment was undoubtedly to enforce the absolute equality of the two races before the law. But in the nature of things, it could not have been intended to abolish distinctions based upon color or to enforce social, as distinguished from political, equality or a commingling of two races upon terms unsatisfactory to either." Basically, he used a lot of fancy words to say, the 14th Amendment said, like, hey, two races are equal, but it doesn't say that I have to force people to engage socially in those aspects. And, if you live in a community where that community is full of people like you and the other community doesn't want people like you in it, I shouldn't be having to force that community to let you be in it, which is really fucked up. Because what he did by doing this unintentionally, well, maybe even intentionally, was he basically let people kick people to the curb and keep them out of amenities that really the federal government had paid for during Reconstruction. But then the South was like, nah, those are ours. That's our shit. You black people can get this terrible shit. Fuck you. And the black people are like, no, fuck you, white people. You fucking suck. And it was a lot of back and forth here. So the lone dissenter, the only dissenter from the Supreme Court, Justice John Marshall Harlan, provided a vehement critique of the majority's stance, famously stating, "Our Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens," and his dissent would be vindicated by history, but at the time was a solitary voice against a wave of institutionalized racism. That's right. He basically said the same thing that Albion did. So, it's pretty cool. He agreed with him completely. So the Plessy decision emboldened southern states to expand segregation laws and practices with renewed vigor, leading to half a century more of Jim Crow laws that codified and enforced segregation in virtually all aspects of public life. The Democratic Party, particularly the southern states, embraced the ruling, as it aligned with the segregationist and white supremacist policies many of its members supported at the time. The Republican Party of Lincoln and emancipation had by this time largely retreated from its earlier commitment to civil rights, which particularly in the face of political pressure and the need to court white voters in both the North and South, because they had to keep the voters up. You got the numbers of voters matter more than people's rights. Fuck that. Terrible sentiment. Kind of how it is today a little bit. It's really fucked. It's just a numbers game. People don't matter. This would actually help aid Nathaniel Plainview, and he would give this statement to a preacher who had been for the interstate commerce decision to be enforced, because in a way, like he kind of viewed it as like, oh, I won. Let me go ahead and read this letter that he read out loud to him. Elijah, you speak of salvation, of righteousness. Let me ask you, where is the righteousness in this world? You come to me after this ruling, looking for a scrap of hope. The decision is the work of men like me. Do you understand? Men who know how to sway the masses, how to bend the ear of justice until it deafens to the pleas of the righteous. You want to help your flock. I say to you, what can you offer them that I haven't already taken? I have laid my tracks across this country. I own the land, the steel, the men that forge it. I bought the politicians who write your laws, who uphold your segregation. I've been the oil to the machines, and oh, how smoothly they run. And it's not just them, it's the people. People's minds are not their own, they are mine. I whisper a thought and they repeat it until it becomes the truth. They sip on my ideas and believe they quench their own thirst. So when they sit at my table, and they will, I won't just eat in front of them. No, I will drink what's in their cup. And it's not just drinking, Elijah, it's taking. It's claiming what is rightfully mine by the sweat of my brow and the cunning of my brain. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up. The hope is in the struggle, Elijah. Not in the victory or defeat, but in the fight. Keep fighting and I'll keep winning. That's the order of things. And then he apparently just, laughed and walked out of the board. If you can't tell, this is from There Will Be Blood. I had a lot of fun imagining that the railroad baron was just Nathaniel Plainview from the movie, and it's just a bit, but it's essentially how the railroad barons acted. They were just as egomaniacal as Daniel Plainview from There Will Be Blood. So good to know. Hope you enjoyed that. Anyways, continuing on. The separate but equal doctrine stood unchallenged until the mid-20th century, when the civil rights movement gained momentum, and ultimately led to the Supreme Court's rejection of the Plessy and Brown v. Board of Education 1954, which we'll get into. We'll get into how that worked out. Okay, so then in 1913, we have the ratification of the 16th Amendment. It marked a significant extension of federal power, granting Congress the explicit authority to levy a direct income tax without apportioning it among the states or basing it on the U.S. Census. The amendment laid the groundwork for the modern tax system and represented a dramatic shift in the federal government's role in American life. The amendment was a response to the need for a stable revenue stream that could support a growing nation and address the inadequacies of the tariff-based system, which many felt placed an unfair burden on consumers and created economic imbalances. Which it did. It really fucked over consumers quite a bit, actually. People could hike up prices whenever they wanted and, make as much money as they wanted to do, which is, not great at all. Anyways, the idea of an income tax was not new. A version had been temporarily implemented during the Civil War and had surfaced various times thereafter. However, previous attempts were challenged and, in the case of the 1894 income tax, was struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional. First-hand accounts of the period, such as those from progressive politicians like Wisconsin Senator Robert M. Lafayette, reveal a fervent push for tax reform. Lafayette, a champion of the progressive movement, saw the income tax as a means to redistribute the financial responsibilities of government more equitably. He said, "The fortunes of the country should contribute in proportion to their ability to pay." So he's like, it should be fair, essentially, is what it should be. Yeah. Public sentiment at the time was growing in favor of such tax system, spurred by muckraking journalists who highlighted the vast wealth and inequalities and the excesses of the Gilded Age. Progressive Republicans and Democrats alike saw the income tax as a tool to address these inequalities. So in 1909, President William Howard Taft, a Republican, called on Congress to propose a constitutional amendment. This move was politically savvy, placating progressives while putting pressure on the anti-tax faction, many of whom were in Taft's own party, by pushing the decision to the states. He's like, hey, states, here you go. You fucking decide it. The 16th Amendment's ratification signified a remarkable departure from earlier economic policies. Democrats, who had long championed the interests of the rural and working-class Americans, saw the amendment as a victory against the protective tariff system, which they argued favored northern industrialists at the expense of southern and western states. And again, they kind of flipped here, right? Because back in the day, they wanted the federal government to stay the fuck out of the states. But now, all of a sudden, because the tariff system favored the northern Republicans and the industrial system that they had been building up and making a fuck ton of money on, they're like, actually, this happens quite a bit. So on the other hand, the Republican Party, traditionally aligned with big business and industrial capital, found itself at a crossroads. So this is where we can start to see the Republicans are kind of dealing some more into conflict here. While some Republicans feared the growth of federal power and the potential dampening effect on economic growth, others within the party embraced the tax as a necessary tool for modern governance. So I'd say this is more like a bipartisan agreement where they're like, we need to make money. Okay, we need to, this country needs to be able to fund a lot of shit. The amendment symbolized, and take care of its people, but mostly get more money. The amendment symbolized the era's progressive ethos and the public's increasing appetite for reforms that would ensure a fair distribution of wealth and more substantial federal involvement in addressing social and economic issues. Like roads, public education, or healthcare, or, some things that the general public needs. But instead, instead of all that lame shit, We spend 15% of the total income that America makes on things like 61 brand new F-35s, which I understand completely. And, by the way, I completely understand that. Have you guys heard about F-35s? Okay, let me give you a breakdown. The F-35 jet, Lightning II, from Lockheed and Martin. In Lockheed and Martin, we trust, okay? Because that is who God is. It's Lockheed and Martin. There's no actual God. It's Lockheed and Martin. That's who God is, and the destroyer. Okay, the F-35 isn't just fast. It's supersonic. It can sprint at speeds up to around Mach 1.6. That is about 1,200 miles per hour and 1,930 kilometers per hour for you fucking kilometer people. People use the metric system. I want you guys to imagine being whisked away at that velocity. That you can cross entire states, that it takes the time to have a leisurely lunch. 0 to 60? Please. The F-35 takes mere fucking seconds to get off to takeoff speed and is breaking the sound barrier while others are still warming up their fucking engines. Right? Okay. And then when it comes to stealth, the F-35 plays the ultimate game of cosmic hide and seek, right? It's got a skin that absorbs radar waves and a shape that fucking scatters them, making it nearly invisible to enemy radars. This jet is the embodiment of you can't hit what you can't fucking see. It's like the charming, mysterious figure at a party who everyone notices, but nobody can quite figure out. That is the F-35. Firepower. Now this is where the F-35 truly shines. If you were to go on a date with someone, the F-35 is like dating a superhero. With an arsenal that would make Tony Stark raise an eyebrow. It can carry an impressive array of weapons, from precision-guided bombs to heat-seeking missiles. Its internal weapons bay keep everything tucked away to maintain that svelte stealth profile. Right? Oh, fuck, it's sexy. But when it's time to unleash hell, the F-35 can do so with a payload that can exceed 18,000 pounds. When fully equipped. Oh, fuck. It's like, that skinny guy who thinks not going to be ripped, but then when he takes off his shirt, he's like shredded. That is the F-35, right? And then not only that, the pilot of the F-35 gets some fucking dope ass shit. So the F-35's helmet, it isn't just like a piece of regular headgear, right? It's a futuristic visor that provides a 360-degree view of the world. The pilot sees a live feed from all cameras all around the aircraft projected right onto the visor of the helmet, allowing them to look through the plane. It's like having eyes in the back of your head, only better. Can you imagine? It's like you're literally playing a video game and you get to see a top-down view. So you can see your enemy coming around you. The F-35 is the perfect fucking machine of death. Its range is substantial. It can strike targets up to 1,200 nautical miles away without refueling. It's crazy. This is the aerial equivalent of long-distance dating where you can have breakfast in New York and dinner in London. That's how far it can go. Not only that, with its advanced countermeasures and electronic warfare capabilities, the F-35 doesn't just avoid detection. It can actively jam enemy systems, making it a very slippery target. It's not just about starting fights. It's about finishing them on its own terms and really starting fights when you really want to, or you need oil, okay? What America needs is fucking oil to fuel these goddamn beauty machines of death. The F-35 isn't a lone wolf. It's a team player as well. It's designed to work seamlessly with allied forces, sharing data and resources, right? It's like dating someone who not only gets along with your friends, but makes them all better for being there. You know that guy where you bring them and you introduce them to your friend group, you're a little nervous at first, but then he gets along with everyone, and then for some reason, they become like better friends with your friends than you were. It's like that. And, you're just really happy for them because you're just so glad that you're with them. Okay. And yeah, while the F-35 might be expensive with price tags in the tens of millions per unit and very significant operating costs because just the upkeep alone on that is kind of insane. But, you're not just investing in a piece of machinery. You're investing in a piece of mind and unparalleled capability. It's the high-end sports car of the skies, right? This is the fucking Bugatti, Lamborghini, Ferrari of the sky, okay? the price reflects the luxury and fucking performance. I would let an F-35 peg the fuck out of me and be fine if if my wife watched while it did it. All right. You know what? You want these. Fuck kids and poor people with cancer. Who cares? We need every American citizen to be able to fly one of these bad boys one day. Yeah. Sorry. The F-35 is a beautiful machine. Man, yeah, that's that, and that sort of sales pitch is what lets Lockheed Martin stay in business constantly. The introduction of the federal income tax fundamentally changed the relationship between citizens and their government. Sorry, going back to the main point now. It provided a consistent revenue stream that would enable the expansion of the government services and implementation of policies that would have far-reaching consequences throughout the 20th century and beyond, influencing debates on federal power that persist to this day. Right. Everybody's like, I want government out of my shit. And I hate taxes. Well, it's because of this. Okay, and not only did we have the ratification of the 16th, we also had the 17th Amendment in 1913. This amendment altered farmers' original constitution, the framers' original constitution, by establishing the direct election of U.S. senators by popular vote, rather than their selection by state legislators, as had been the practice since the nation's founding. The push for this change was part of the broader progressive era reforms that sought to make the American political system more democratic and less susceptible to corruption. Prior to the 17th Amendment, Senate seats were often the products of backroom deals and political cronyism. That's right. People like to go behind the door and be like, and listen, I'm going to make you senator. Okay, yeah, I'm going to make you senator, and you're going to suck my toes a little bit, just a tiny bit, maybe just the pinky toe. Okay, that's all you got to do, and I'll make you senator. That's basically what happened here with this shit. Reformers argued that the direct election would return power to the people and help curtail the influence of money and special interests in politics. The idea here is help, but that's nearly impossible in our society now because people with money are job creators, and those job creators feel like their voice is more important than any of their employees' voices. They also are the only ones who can fund a senator's vacation. Are you going to pay for so-and-so's vacay to Cabo? I don't think so. So clearly you shouldn't fucking matter then, because you can't pay for Senator Mick so-and-so's Cabo vacay, okay? And you can't pay for his fucking tiki drinks on the beach. And so why should you matter? Huh? Yeah, but you didn't think about that? Huh? Did you? It's like, why even be friends with someone if they're not going to afford you some cool shit, right? That's totally how friendship and society works. You gotta be able to pay for everybody to be your friend, okay? That's essentially how the government works. There are a bunch of people who bought and paid for their buddies when they're growing up. So it's sad. Anyways, the debates and public discourse leading up to the amendment's passage were intense. Progressive politicians and activists such as William Jennings Bryan spoke ardently about the needs for this reform. Bryan, in speeches and writings, described the amendment as essential for ensuring that the Senate was as responsive to the people as the House of Representatives, which makes sense. Opposition to the amendment came from more conservative elements who feared that direct elections would upset the careful political balance designed by the founders, weakening the state's power. And a lot of this does remind me of honestly, Puritans and the separatists, and then the New England Church's stance on things are like, guys, we can't listen. These people wrote a document, this Bible, we can't reinterpret it. This is the law. And Puritans were like, okay, yes, and we need to be a little bit more strict. Honestly, we gotta be even stricter than you guys are being. And separatists were like, I hate all of you. So, and we could see it. Now reflecting back here on people who believe a piece of paper written by people back in the past, for some reason, were infallible and it shouldn't be changed. And they're like, they knew to make the states as powerful as possible. And it's like, no, they didn't. Maybe Jefferson wanted that, but Quincy Adams and quite a few other people recognized the need for essential power. Anyways, these people argued that senators chosen by state legislators were more likely to be experienced politicians who understood the needs of their states and could protect their interests at the federal level, which I can get behind that idea because it's a lot like maybe if there's like an interview process and like a education requirement and like a bunch of other things, like, a prereq. Whereas with this, any old Joe could become a senator, and who wants that? The people do. That's who the people want. Any old Joe to become senator. Maybe any old Joel has some good ideas, despite his lack of being buddies with you. Okay, little state legislators there. Fuck you. Anyways, despite such opposition, the proposal for direct election of senators gained momentum, fueled by several factors. Chief among them was the increasing public awareness of Senate malfeasance and corruption. So, bolstered by muckraking journalists who exposed the often sordid details of the public machinations behind Senate appointments. Again, lots of toe sucking and soaking going on. Positive, they soak their toes in something, right? The eventual ratification of the 17th Amendment can be seen as a victory for the democratic governance. It was celebrated as a step toward a more participatory democracy where voters could directly hold their senators accountable. First-hand accounts from the time, like those of Oregonian suffragette Abigail Scott Duniway, reflect the hopeful sentiment that this would lead to a Senate more representative and more responsive to the American public. The amendment's impact was immediate and lasting. The composition of the Senate began to change, with the newly elected senators perceived as having greater legitimacy and a more direct mandate from the electorate. Because people are like, oh, okay, I trust this guy because I voted him in, not this asshole who just like put him there, which is fair. I mean, that's true, right? If you go vote for someone and they get the seat, then you feel like you contributed to them getting their seat. And then they started letting senators like choose their boundary lines and, just stay in office for fucking ever. This change also contributed to shifting the balance of power within the federal government. Senators now had to be more attentive to the will of the people rather than the interest of state legislators. In the broader context of American history, the 17th Amendment is a landmark reform that entrenched the principle of direct democracy within the legislative process. It not only changed the mechanism of Senate elections, but also set a precedent for future democratic reforms. The amendment has since been a cornerstone of the American electoral system, though it continues to be the subject of debate among those who argue for a return to the original constitutional design and those who defend the direct expression of popular will. That's right. There are still some people who have decided that, maybe they had it right. Maybe it'd be better if, all of our Harvard buddies could be the Senate instead of these assholes who get voted in and defy my will. How dare they defy me? And also during this time, we do have World War I going on. I should mention that it's honestly not as impactful to America as you would think it would be in the terms of like the political discretion here between the Republicans and the Democrats, because that's really what we're talking about today. We're not talking about, it would lead to the Great Depression and the stock market crash, just with some, just some of the laws that get made, the U.S.'s involvement or non-involvement in the League of Nations. I don't know. Or, I'm forgetting. I didn't write about it. I didn't study it for today. But anyways, there's some stuff that it leads to, but it's not as important. But World War I was going on during this time as well, just for you guys to know. Okay. And then in 1929, we have the stock market crash. So on October 29th, 1929, this marked one of the most devastating days in the financial history of the United States. It's known as Black Tuesday, when the stock market crashed. The cataclysmic event wiped out billions of dollars of wealth in a matter of hours, signaling the onset of the Great Depression, a decade-long period of economic turmoil that would reshape the American political and social landscape. The Roaring Twenties had been a time of seeming prosperity and economic boom, driven in part by widespread speculation and investment in the stock market. However, much of this was built on shaky foundations, overextended credit, speculative loans, and a lack of regulation. When investor confidence faltered, it triggered a mass sell-off, causing stock prices to plummet. We here in modern days actually saw a mini version of this with cryptocurrency. So if you guys have a lot of you remember back when COVID started, crypto boomed. It popped the fuck off. Basically any coin at some point was going to make you a little bit of money, or at least it seemed like it was going to make you some money. As the crypto too was a highly unregulated and highly overspeculated market. And it would lead to a ton of people losing a shit ton of money and a few scammers walking away with millions of dollars. I'm talking millions. I mean, this crypto drop may not have had the same global impact or effects on society, but it did follow a very similar path in my mind, like its rise and fall. I mean, crypto's still around, like stuff like Bitcoin and a couple of the other bigger cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin's just the one I can think of right now. I think Lee or whatever. I can't remember what the other one's called. I used to trade and sell crypto during that time too. It was fun. I didn't make a bunch of money. I made some money because I sold out when I knew I should sell out, but I did make a little bit, just a tiny bit of money. Not nothing huge though. It was like maybe like $1,000 or $2,000. So that's, taxed the shit out of me though for that. That sucked. But then I had kids and then I got, a bigger tax. And it doesn't matter. Anyways, the reason why crypto didn't cause like another like recession or like economic as big of an impact is because of the effects on the banks. So the banks weren't involved really in crypto all that much. We had some brokerages starting to get involved in crypto, and that was about it. And even then, brokerages weren't really all that involved in crypto. It was Robinhood. Is that even really a brokerage? I can't remember. I think they're like somewhere in between, and that's why they got away with like not letting GME be traded or some shit like that. Anyways, they partner with brokerages. So companies that partnered with brokerages was starting to get into it. And that was not going to have as big of an impact on banks and other institutions that we rely heavily on. And we learned from this Great Depression on how not to fuck up as bad. We still kind of fuck up, but we're definitely not to this level, which is nice. So firsthand accounts from Black Tuesday on October 29th, 1929 describe the chaos on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Benjamin Roth, who is a lawyer from Youngstown, Ohio, recounted, "The air was filled with the sound of ticker tape machines spitting out the bad news as prices fell through the floor. Men who had been wealthy in the morning were ruined by the afternoon." Just, it sucks. The aftermath of the crash was swift and severe. Banks failed, businesses closed, and unemployment soared. The economic downturn was felt worldwide, but the United States, as the epicenter of the crash, faced a crisis that would challenge the very foundations of its capitalist system. President Herbert Hoover, a Republican, was in office at the time of the crash. His response was rooted in the belief that the economy would correct itself and that federal intervention was not the solution. Hoover was, a pretty staunch believer. He's like, hey, just, don't touch it. It will correct itself eventually, which I kind of disagree with. I think when something like that big happens, the federal government does need to step in and figure something out because its impact on society cannot be ignored. So, Hoover's policies, which included the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act and an initial reluctance to provide direct aid to the unemployed, were widely criticized for exacerbating the Depression. It did increase economic depression on people, and the sadness people had to face, and the fact that they couldn't afford to, feed their kids. Mostly because people in power didn't have to worry about that. They were making money. And they're like, oh, fuck these poor people. The Democratic Party, however, sensing a shift in public sentiment, began to position itself as the party of active government intervention. So here's the big shift, right? Democrats criticized Hoover's response as inadequate and campaigned on a platform promising a more robust and direct government role in stabilizing the economy. And the alignment begins to really fucking shift here between these elephants and donkeys, right? Because they're like, hey, we're going to step in and help you guys. We're going to be the party that does that. Forget about our racism. Actually, don't forget about it. We're good with being racist for at least a few more years here. That's kind of what happened. Anyways, this would set the stage for the 1932 presidential election and the rise of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who would introduce the New Deal, which is a big series of programs, public works projects, financial reforms, and regulations. Okay. So let's go ahead and get into that. So after FDR gets elected, we have the New Deal. It was implemented between 1933 and 1939 under President Franklin D. Roosevelt. This was a series of unprecedented programs and reforms designed to counteract the devastating effects of the Great Depression. This bold policy agenda aimed to provide immediate economic relief, foster recovery, and reform the financial system to prevent a future collapse. First-hand accounts from this period, such as those from Frances Perkins, FDR's Secretary of Labor, and the first woman appointed to the U.S. Cabinet, woohoo, go women, offer insights into the ambitious scope of the New Deal. She said, "The president intends to treat the task as we would treat the emergency of a war." Good way to do it. Perkins recalled of Roosevelt's resolve to combat the economic crisis. The New Deal was characterized by the implementation of various programs, collectively referred to by the alphabet soup of their acronyms. I'm talking, there's a crazy amount of acronyms here, so get ready. We have the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC. We have the Public Works Administration, the PWA, and the Works Progress Administration, the WPA. Like, that wasn't going to be confusing. Holy shit. They sought to alleviate unemployment through vast public work projects. So by creating a bunch of new jobs to aid in the public works, that would help take care of the unemployment problem, but they probably still weren't making a bunch of money. Meanwhile, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, or the AAA, and the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, the FERA, aimed at stabilizing agricultural prices by providing direct aid to those most in need. Which is great. It's a lot of good shit. People, if you're going to be in charge of a country, you should probably think about taking care of your citizens. You should probably prioritize your citizens first and foremost, as opposed to, other shit. Because if you don't have citizens in a country, then you don't really have a fucking country, do you? You have a piece of land that you own that you make laws for some reason. Anyways, Eleanor Roosevelt, the first lady and cousin to FDR, played a crucial role in advocating for the New Deal and bringing the plight of the nation's poor to the president's attention. She said, "I see the New Deal as a means to bring the spirit back to the people who had been so badly shaken by the Depression." She wrote in her column, My Day. She had a great column. And it was actually funny. As I was kind of going through a few of her columns, I actually found a fascinating article where she explained the merits of having a family. I thought it was cool, so I wanted to share it with you guys. She says, "In our rich tapestry of American life, with its varied threads of heritage, tradition, and kinship, the practice of marrying with one's extended family, such as distant cousins, has historically been seen not only as acceptable, but indeed quite advantageous. It is a subject that might raise eyebrows in modern parlance, yet, upon closer examination through the looking glass of history and biology, one finds that such unions are not only super okay, but enmeshed in a complex web of societal genetic rationale. To weave this intricate story, one must begin by understanding the very fabric of our social construct. It is paramount to recognize that in previous epochs, the intermarriage between cousins was commonplace, a norm engendered by the need to fortify familial alliances and secure the tapestries of wealth, power, and property. This practice is as ancient as the pharaohs of Egypt and as storied as the noble houses of Europe, threading through the ancestry of many distinguished families. Now, when the subject of cousins and procreation arises, it can indeed cause a flutter of discomfort in the modern mind. But let us over-explain, or shall we say embroider upon why this matter, examined with the meticulous eye of a needlepoint artist, is not peculiar at all. Firstly, consider the sheer mathematics of kinship. By the time one is addressing a distant cousin, the shared blood is but a minuscule drop in a vast ocean of genetic material. The biology of distant cousins procreating is akin to the faintest brush of two branches of a great oak, far enough apart to whisper in the wind without entangling. It would be remiss not to acknowledge the practical side of genetics, that such unions diminish concerns about the concentration of recessive genes, thereby not weaving a whirring pattern into the family lineage. Furthermore, it is not without a certain historical charm to reflect upon the courtships of yesteryear, where the joining of distant relatives was often a cause for celebration, much like the jubilation that accompanies the successful grafting of two rare and beautiful plants. Such unions were seen as a way to preserve the unique hues and patterns of a family's legacy, ensuring that the rich colors of their heritage would not fade into obscurity. However, as we unfurl more of this thread, it is essential to acknowledge how these reasons, albeit grounded in erstwhile practicality begin to tangle into a somewhat peculiar pattern. For example, advocating for cousin marriage as a means to concentrate wealth and maintain purity of bloodline may, to the contemporary mind, seem an outdated and eccentric tapestry, more befitting a medieval tapestry than a modern social fabric. Additionally, while discussing the practicalities of genetics may ease some scientific concerns, it certainly weaves a peculiar strand into the conversation. Is the romance of kinship not marred by the clinical dissection of genealogical charts? Where does one draw the line in the family tree before it becomes less of a branching splendor and more of a convoluted knot? In a society that prizes individuality and the broadening of horizons, the pursuit of a partner within one's own extended family can seem like tracing one steps backward rather than charting a new course forward. It brings to mind an insular garden where new seeds are seldom sown, a notion that might appear increasingly eccentric in our cosmopolitan age. In conclusion, while the marriage of distant cousins is, from a biological standpoint, super okay, the underpinnings of such decisions, when examined through the lens of contemporary values and expanded social understanding, knit together a rather peculiar pattern in our current social fabric where diversity and the mingling of different threads create a stronger and more vibrant cloth. The reasoning that once made cousin unions desirable now renders them curiously anachronistic, if not outright peculiar. As we progress, let us embrace a broader vision of family, one that allows for the interweaving of diverse threads from far beyond our immediate loom. This, perhaps, is the key to crafting a society as rich and varied as the quilt of humanity itself. So let's take a breath and say out loud, there ain't nothing wrong with a little cousin fucking. Big E out. I clearly made that up, but my God, I did search for a long time through her threads to see if she ever brought up the fact that, I married my cousin, but it's totally cool. It's like super okay. All right, don't even judge me. Couldn't find it, so I was like, fuck it, I'll make my own. I'll make my own little article of yours where you try to justify it. Oh my God, I really hope one day someone unearths a letter or something where she clearly understands why it's weird, but tries to justify it. Same with Einstein and Darwin. I want them to have, recognized that cousin fucking is weird to do. Anyways, the New Deal's financial reforms were equally transformative as cousin fucking. The Glass-Steagall Act established the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or the FDIC, protecting bank deposits. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, was formed to regulate the stock market and prevent abuses that had contributed to the 1929 crash. The impact of the New Deal policies on the American public was profound. Oral histories from the era, such as those collected by the WPA, recount stories of jobless men and women finding work, families receiving crucial aid, and a renewed sense of hope taking hold across the nation. However, the New Deal also faced criticism and resistance. Conservatives, many within the Republican Party, viewed Roosevelt's policies as overreaching and a drift towards socialism. And you can't have socialism. It's scary. That's too much. How dare you? How dare you take care of poor people? Fuck poor people. Oh, God. Oh, my God. That's really what it feels like they say when they talk about these policies most of the time. Just say what you mean. Say that you hate poor people. You want them to die. That's what you mean. So the Supreme Court initially struck down several New Deal programs, prompting FDR's controversial court-packing plan, which he later abandoned. Which was him. He was going to essentially stockpile the courts with people who were going to just pass it anyways, which would probably have been a little illegal and may have gotten him, impeached. But yeah, it's whatever. So by expanding the role of the federal government in the economy and introducing social safety nets, the New Deal redefined the relationship between Americans and their government. It cemented the Democratic Party's reputation as the party of government intervention and social welfare, a stark contrast to the Republican Party's traditionally more conservative approach to economic policy. Because Hoover was like, I don't give a fuck. Let's just fucking get whatever. So the New Deal era culminated in the outbreak of World War II, which would itself have a monumental impact on the U.S. economy and the role of government. So let's go ahead and get into that, right? The period from 1941 to 1945 was a defining era in American history as the United States entered World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Never forget. Never forgetty. Let's eat some spaghetti. The nation mobilized for war, catalyzing the profound transformation in its economy, society, and position on the world stage. A bunch of people getting ready to go fuck up some more people. Will create some jobs, and will get people to go out. It gets people, spending more money on shit, taking care of America. It's whatever. Okay, anyways. This era was marked by an overwhelming bipartisan effort that brought together disparate political factions focused on the common goal of victory. Meanwhile, Black American citizens were still getting fucked over in southern states. Let's not forget that shit is still going on. Okay, people are being discriminated against and kicked out of a bunch of places. So we need to remember that. Okay, so the U.S.'s entry into the war galvanized a national response that saw industry, government, and citizenry unite. Oh, and by the way, Southern Democrats during FDR's time, FDR was a Democrat. He was probably racist. He was probably super racist. So, or maybe not. I don't know. We can assume a lot of things, but I'm going to assume that because more than likely, if you were a Democrat back before the 40s, you were at least a little super racist. Matter of fact, if you were white before the 40s, for the most part, you're probably pretty racist. Anyways, so this national response saw industry, government, and citizenry unite. Factories that had once struggled through the Depression were revitalized to support the war effort. Right, so the government needed some bullets, and they were like, well, fuck it, let's make some bullets. The wartime economy helped to finally lift the United States out of the Great Depression's lingering malaise. First-hand accounts from workers and soldiers reflect a time of intense activity and purpose. One account stated, "We knew that every rivet, every bullet, every ship mattered." It reflected from a shipyard worker from the time. President Franklin D. Roosevelt led the nation through these trying times with an emphasis on national unity. He collaborated. Oh, that's right. So 1932, he was still president. He was president for longer than 2 terms for the most part. I think it was due to the war, right? Yeah, the wars will cost it. As he collaborated closely with Republican leaders, recognizing that a bipartisan approach was essential for wartime governance. This cooperation resulted in the creation of several new agencies like the War Production Board, the WPB, loved his acronyms. This motherfucker loved acronyms, and the Office of War Mobilization, which oversaw the distribution of materials and production. The war also ushered in an era of internationalism in American foreign policy. The Lend-Lease Act, passed before U.S. entry into the war and subsequent alliances, signaled the departure from previous isolationist tendencies in the beginning of the United States as a global superpower, which is good. I mean, yeah, if you're going to be isolationist, you're going to fuck yourself over eventually, and that's especially any island countries. Trade is necessary to progress. Okay, you got to work with everybody. Eminent Republican Senator Arthur H. Vandenberg famously reversed his isolationist stance, later writing, "The war taught us that oceans were not moats, but mere mill ponds." Very profound right there. He's basically saying the ocean, it's not like this giant thing that you need to cross. Our countries are our neighbors, right? Those other countries are our neighbors, and they impact us no matter what. American society was profoundly affected. The women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers to fill roles vacated by men who went to fight. Rosie, the Riveter, became an iconic representation of women's contribution to the war effort. You may have seen lots of pictures of her. She got that, like arm up. It's like, oh yeah, we're tough women. African Americans served bravely in the armed forces despite facing segregation at home, inspiring the Double V campaign, a fight for victory against fascism abroad and racial injustice at home. Yet the war was not without its contentious policies. Executive Order 666, or 9,066, which led to the internment of Japanese Americans, is a stark reminder of how war can impact civil liberties. This policy, implemented under Democratic administration, was widely supported at the time, but later recognized as a grave injustice. It was really fucked up. They went, put Japanese Americans into camps like the Germans were doing to the Jewish population. So that's totally cool. We were fighting against fascist assholes who were doing some horribly inhumane shit, and we were also doing some horribly inhumane shit. Not great. But then again, not the Japanese in America. They had nothing to do with the what the Japanese were doing in China, but goddamn, what they were doing in China was fucked. I might get into that eventually. Man, the first time I ever read a book on the rape of Nanking, it fucked me up a little bit. I was like, oh, it's disgusting. But war is hell. At the war's conclusion, with the Allies' victory, the signing of the United Nations Charter, the United States firmly established itself as a leader on the global stage. Republicans and Democrats alike had played a part in shaping this new international order. The wartime experiences had also laid the groundwork for the post-war world, with the onset of the Cold War prompting new alignments and challenges. Almost immediately after World War II, we're going to get into some Cold War shit. It does take a few years, but it happens pretty fast with splitting up Germany, right? So we have the unity and national purpose of the World War II years stand as a testament to what can be achieved when political parties set aside their differences for a common cause. It's great. Love it when they team up. It is a period that not only redefined America's role in the world, but also reshaped the political dynamics within the United States, as both major political parties embraced a more internationalist perspective that would guide American foreign policy for generations to come. Right. And then in 1947, we have the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act, officially known as the Labor Management Relations Act as well. This marked a pivotal moment in American labor relations. It was coming on the heels of a period marked by significant labor strikes and unrest, mostly due to women working. Made people mad. They're like, I had to manage all these women. Fuck them. Anyways, and kids also working. They wanted to have kid slave labor because kids are great at working the mines. But anyways, this act was a legislative effort backed primarily by the Republican Party, surprise, surprise, to impose limitations on the power of labor unions. Yeah, not fun. They, like to fuck over workers. So go Republican Party. You love rich people. We get it. Post World War II, America saw an unprecedented wave. And I'm going to stop myself here. I don't hate rich people. I think it's great that we live in a country where we all have the chance. Most of us have the chance to become rich. And the reason why I say most of us is there are people that are born into the ghetto, right? And there are some very few stories of people being born into a very shitty situation and making out. The overall majority of those people are fucked over for life because of the situation they are born into. They can't help that, but they are fucked over for life, right? However, I do think capitalism, when it's not being abused and essentially being turned into an oligarchy, is awesome. I really do agree with its principles when it's capitalism, not whatever the fuck we have today, where essentially if you're rich enough, you can just buy out your congressman. You can get laws passed if you make enough money. If you're in the very, top 10 richest people here in America, you essentially get to decide whatever the fuck happens here. I mean, some people will disagree with you, thankfully, and cause you some grief, but you can overcome it pretty goddamn easily for the most part. Anyways, my issue is what we have in America today is not what capitalism was intended to be. What capitalism was intended to be was people were supposed to be paid enough to live, and we definitely do not pay people enough to fucking live. Right? Livable wages now are not being paid. And so we need to figure out what a livable wage is before we can start saying, oh yeah, no, we live in a capitalist society again. Otherwise, we're just getting rid of the middle class. And what livable means too, for people. Livable should mean you should be able to afford a house, be able to afford a car, be able to afford to have a couple kids, and be able to afford your food, utilities, all of that, and your medical expenses. Instead, we have people who are not able to afford rent, not able to afford medical expenses, not able to afford food for their kids. And they're told, oh, well, you just don't save enough. No, you hike the prices up to a point where people can't save anymore. They literally can't save. They're spending their entire paycheck that they're getting because they're being told this is a livable wage when it's not. We don't have capitalism here in America anymore. And anybody who says we still live in a capitalist America is wrong. Okay. And that's why we have a lot of people pushing for socialism. It's not because they want to live in a communist country. It's because they want shit to be livable again. They want to live in a more capitalist society where people are able to live freely. And that is the issue I have. And if you have problems with it, fucking write me and talk to me. I'll debate you all day long if you disagree with me. Mostly because I know I'm right because I live here. So, that's cool. Anyways, post-World War II America saw an unprecedented wave of industrial action as workers who had faced wage controls and demanding conditions during the war sought to assert their rights in an economy adjusting to peacetime. The year 1946 alone saw a record number of strikes, which played a role in swinging the midterm congressional elections towards the Republicans. Public sentiment was mixed, with many growing concerned about the impact of strikes on the economy, while others defended the workers' right to collective action. Republican lawmakers responding to the situation and with control of Congress drafted the Taft-Hartley Act, which included provisions that were the antithesis to unions, essentially, right? The act was designed to balance the rights of management and labor, but in practice it imposed several restrictions on unions. One of the key features was the prohibition of closed shops. Agreements that required workers to be union members before being hired. Just fucked. If you get hired and you weren't a union member, well, you're fucked. You can't become a union member now. And additionally, the act allowed states to pass right-to-work laws, which prevented unions from requiring union membership before employment, even in unionized workplaces. Which I hate people who shit on unions. I get that they're annoying for, bosses or like people who own a business, but they're there to protect your employees, man. Because your HR is not there to fucking protect your employees. Your HR is there to protect your ass. And employees don't have anything that's going to protect their ass. So a union is necessary. It's a give and take. And you should listen to your employees' concerns. And if you're a good boss, most of them probably won't feel the need to unionize if you actually take care of your people. But if you don't, expect them to fucking unionize. And you can't just trick people all that easily. People are smart. There are some people who are dumb and definitely will be, fall for the same shit every single time. But it's complicated. It's a complicated situation. Yeah, because I get it. I get it from like a business perspective, how you don't want unions to be like, well, I feel like you should, have to pay like everything for them, but you should definitely pay them a livable fucking wage you should pay them the amount that it means to the company, right? So you should be making X amount, and then your employees definitely should be making X amount based off of their production. And that's what matters. Anyways, additionally, the act that the Republicans passed, going back to the main topic now, the act allowed states to pass right-to-work laws, which prevented unions from requiring union membership for employment, even in unionized workplaces, which Utah still has. And I live in Utah. And so it's a right to work state. Yay, Utah. First-hand accounts at the time, such as those from union leader Walter Reuther, expressed dismay at the act's provisions. He said, "The bill is an assault against the working men and women of this nation." Reuther declared, predicting that it would weaken unions' ability to protect workers, which it did. That's the whole point of it. So despite fervent opposition from labor groups and a veto from Democratic President Harry S. Truman, who criticized it as a, quote, slave labor bill, end quote, Congress overrode the veto, signaling a significant legislative defeat for the labor movement. The act's supporters, including its namesake, Senator Robert A. Taft, argued that it was a necessary correction to the imbalance that had swung too far in favor of labor during the New Deal era. Oh, how fucked is that, right? It swung too far in the people's hands. We gotta take it away from the people, give it back to the rich guys, okay? Fuck the people. How dare they have a voice and how they should be treated? How dare they tell this, manufacturer that, he shouldn't be able to work us, 12 hours a day, but 7 days a week. And they should be able to do that. And their bosses should be able to tell them what the fuck they want them to do. Which is so dumb. I don't know. there should be fair labor practices implemented in every business out there, right? I shouldn't be allowed to go out and, basically threaten someone like, hey, listen, I can't pay you overtime, and I don't have to pay you overtime by like this and this law. But I am going to say, if you don't work these extra hours and you don't, take care of me, I'm going to fire you and find someone who will, who does want the pitiful amount of money that I'm willing to offer them. Because there's probably someone who's desperate that's living on the street that I can go get right now, which is so fucked, right? That like, yeah. And people, fought against that. And now all of a sudden they didn't like people fighting against that too much. So anyways, they said the bill is not anti-union, but anti-injustice. Anti-injustice for the rich people, Taft contended, asserting that it protected both employers' rights and workers who chose not to join unions. What workers did it protect, Taft? What fucking workers? Maybe managers? I guess. Whatever. The Taft-Hartley Act had a lasting impact on American labor relations. It emboldened states, particularly in the South and Midwest, to pass right-to-work laws, which have been a subject of continued controversy and political debate. To this very day, I live in a right-to-work state. The law also solidified the Republican Party's relationship with the business community, while the Democratic Party maintained its ties with organized labor, advocating for workers' rights and union support. So, yay, Democratic Party. The passage of the Taft-Hartley Act underscored the deep ideological divides between the two parties regarding labor and management rights. It signaled a period of retrenchment following the labor-friendly policies of the New Deal, and reflected the broader post-war shift toward conservatism in Congress. Okay, again, this is where we're starting to get really political, right? And I know this is going to be contentious for a lot of people, especially my opinions on this. Again, I do understand, if you are a business owner, why unions can suck ass, and union fees, other fees. Sometimes you're not able, especially if you're a small business owner, it fucks you over, right? So here's the thing. I personally believe in a system where bigger corporations, so I feel like if you own a business and it makes over a certain amount of money in a year, right? Like your bottom line is this much, then you should be adherent to union practices. If you are a small cafe owner and are, making $100K a year, total, right? You have to pay your rent. You have to do everything else. You're barely scraping by, essentially. No fucking way should you have to deal with the bullshit that the government inflicts on you. But as soon as you do start, I guess, affecting enough people's lives, I think like your total impact on society, once it gets big enough, you should be more adherent to federal regulation. However, if you're a small business owner, you should be more adherent to state regulation and should be able to implement your own practices until you become big enough. And then it becomes like a mix here, right? Your total impact on society is the society that you should be adherent to. So like big ass companies like Microsoft should have to be adherent to the union. And for the most part, all of them are, right? All of the big ones are. Small business owners should not face the same regulation. That is my belief. It is a very mixed and complicated belief, but that's how I view it. And that's what I think would be fair. In determining what's small business and what isn't, it depends on different sectors, different, types of companies, sectors, but, different sections of the workplace. So I do not believe all of you guys who are business owners need to be adherent to all of this bullshit. Because you probably can't afford it. But if you can't afford it, then yes, you should be adherent. Okay? And if you have a big enough impact on society, yes, you should be. So anyways, after that act, we also have another, we have a kind of not great, I'm sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay. Brown v. Board of Education. This is a good one. Okay. So 1954 Supreme Court decision of Brown v. Board of Education marked a watershed, marked a pivotal moment in the struggle for civil rights in the United States. This was a unanimous ruling. The court overturned the separate but equal doctrine established by Plessy v. Ferguson, Woohoo! In 1896. So they declared that state laws segregating public schools were inherently unconstitutional. Finally. The case was named after Oliver Brown, the lead plaintiff in a class action suit filed by the NAACP, more acronyms, on behalf of African American school children in Topeka, Kansas. The NAACP's legal strategy was to show that segregated schools were not and could not be equal, and they caused significant psychological harm to African American children, thus violating the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. Yes. I mean, I can't believe it took that long. It took long enough for people who weren't super racist in the Supreme Court to be there. That's essentially what happened. First-hand accounts from the children and families involved in the case underscored the emotional and psychological toll of segregation. Linda Brown, a third grader when the case began, later recalled, "I remember feeling like I didn't want to go through this anymore, feeling like I was not as good as other kids," which is, that's so sad, dude. I remember learning about this as a kid in grade school. And I remember my teacher asked me how I would feel. Now, we're really like all of us students would feel if we got forced to watch other kids go play on the playground with like a much better playground, much better equipment, and we were told we weren't allowed to simply because we were white or simply because we. She did point me out because I'm a redhead. She's like, well, like Tyler can't go because he's a ginger. So, anyone else that's a redhead shouldn't be able to go play because these are for people with normal hair color. And that stuck with me because, I was like, I can't help being a redhead. What the I mean, I can dye my hair, but it's a little fucked up because I was just born with it. So what the hell why does that make me inherently different? Besides, like, I just have like a different color. And so immediately I was like, oh yeah, if someone's just a different color, they're not different. They're the same as me. They're just a different color. It was profound. And I think this is something that all kids should learn about, and how segregation impacted individuals like Linda Brown. Because, and if they really think about it and put themselves in their shoes, especially as kids, it makes it easier for them to realize, hey, I don't want to be treated like this. And so it's not fair for me to also treat someone else like this. It's not okay to. And at least for me, but I don't know, maybe I was just a good kid and I also had, I had, my mom was, very, very much against racism. So I was like, hey, no, it's awful. Don't do that. And then I come from a family where we're related to Native Americans. My great grandpa Leesburg was half Sioux. And so there's a lot of heritage there. And when we do family history readings, we can look into that side and see how they're discriminated against and how awful it was. So I come from a family with a mixed background history. Not to say that I am Native American. I do not view myself as that at all. I'm pretty fucking white. I have red hair and pale skin. I've been to a Sioux reservation before. And I feel bad for people on the reservation. It's definitely lands that are unkept and not taken care of very well that they were forced to be in because of awful policies like that America implemented or forced them into certain tribal lands. So yeah, it might be just because of that. And I grew up in that culture. I also grew up in Washington, where it's a very democratic state, but I grew up in Eastern Washington, where it's a little less democratic than its western half, for sure. There's a lot of Republicans there. But that's beside the point. So anyways, firsthand, so with Linda Brown in mind, I want people to always think about that. Always put yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Think about how you would feel in that scenario. And I think for the most part, you'll be a good person if you can do that. If you can't do that and you're constantly thinking about yourself, you're probably an awful person. I'm not going to lie. It's not a bad thing to want to take care of yourself. But if you can't have the level of empathy to, at the very least, consider how this is impacting someone else, you're probably not a good person overall. Yes, you do need to be able to take care of yourself. Yes, you do need to, you can't give away everything. And that's not what we're asking people to do. What we're asking people to do is just, feel some basic level of empathy or like sympathy for people. That's all you got to do. And it's back to the Brown v. Board. Okay, so Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the opinion of the court, which emphatically stated that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place, as segregated schools are inherently unequal. Thurgood Marshall, who would later become the first African-American Supreme Court justice, played a crucial role in arguing the case. Go him. Guys, awesome. So the Brown decision did not lead to the immediate desegregation of public schools. Instead, it initiated a complex and often violent process of dismantling institutionalized segregation across the nation. This has been happening since slavery. Slavery, basically dismantling and destroying slavery and this racial bias caused again by Genesis 9, with Noah being drunk and saying, "Hey, all of your descendants of you Canaanites, Canaan, are going to be slaves. Fuck you. How dare you remove my, cover me up and not stare at my junk." So weird. Such a weird biblical justification for slavery. It's so dumb. Or the fact, they were just primitive. They didn't have the technology like us, so obviously they're inferior to us. It's like, no, they just didn't have access to the same materials that you did that would let you invent gunpowder or, invent better ships or other shit. That's it. That's it. You just got born, or luckily your ancestors moved to a place where they're able to get that stuff done. That's all that happened. Anyways, continuing on. Sorry. It's just, God, I hate this shit. I hate how people are so deluded into thinking that because they're a color, they're better than someone else. That makes no fucking sense to me. Dumb. Anyways, the court's mandate for desegregation with all deliberate speed was met with resistance, particularly in the southern states. So both Democratic and Republican parties were affected by the decision, which exacerbated existing divisions within each. Southern Democrats, known as Dixiecrats, staunchly resisted integration efforts, while Northern Democrats began to embrace the civil rights movement more fully. And again, this is where we'll see Democrats shifting, right? The Dixiecrats are going to end up becoming Republicans. But not just because Republicans are racist. It was more of like a campaign that gets done by Nixon. So the Republican Party, which had traditionally been the party of Lincoln, also saw internal divisions, with some members supporting civil rights advances and others aligning more with states' rights advocates. They are beginning, again, because of like all this push with FDR and like how upset they were getting about like a government overreach, they're becoming more anti-federalist, right? They're like, hey, I'm kind of sick of this shit. And more Republicans were just more and more of them were becoming anti-federalist in a way. The Brown ruling set the stage for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, which would see both parties grappling with the issue of race and equality. It underscored the federal government's role in enforcing civil rights and highlighted the Supreme Court's role in shaping national policy. Really just reminded them like, hey, maybe that compromise of 1877 was fucking dumb of us to do. And we should have just kept Reconstruction going until people, realized, hey, they're also citizens now. We should treat them as such. Anyways, and then in 1955 through 56, we have the Montgomery bus boycott. It began on December 5th and lasted until December 20th, 1956. This stands as one of the most powerful peaceful protests in the fight for civil rights in America. The boycott was a response to the arrest of Rosa Parks, an African-American woman who refused to give up her seat to a white man on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Which is good. It's a real good thing. And you'd think after Brown v. Board, the segregation wouldn't have been supported as much, but fuck it. Again, same thing I said at the beginning. If people don't give a shit about a law, they're never going to enforce it or protect it. So the movement was initially planned as a one-day protest, but the overwhelming support from the African-American community turned it into a 381-day mass action. God damn. First-hand accounts from boycott participants reveal a determined and well-organized campaign that would significantly impact the civil rights struggle. Rosa Parks herself, quite yet steadfast, became an icon of the resistance. In her autobiography, she wrote, "The only tired I was tired of giving in." Fuck yeah, Rosa Parks. Such a cool lady. Her individual act of defiance, combined with the subsequent community response, underscored a collective desire for change and justice. The boycott marked the emergence of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Badass right there. As a national civil rights leader, King's role as the president of the Montgomery Improvement Association, or the MIA, again, more acronyms. We love acronyms here. Which coordinated the boycott, placed him at the forefront of a burgeoning movement. His eloquence and commitment to nonviolent protests became hallmarks of the struggle for civil rights. The Montgomery bus boycott also highlighted the role of women in the civil rights movement. It was not only Rosa Parks, but also figures like Joanne Robinson, professor and president of the Women's Political Council, who played crucial roles in organizing and sustaining the boycott. Robinson and other leaders' ability to mobilize the community demonstrated the potential power of grassroots activism. Throughout the year-long protest, the economic impact on the Montgomery public transportation system was significant, demonstrating the collective economic power of the African American community. The protest concluded with a victory for the boycotters when the Supreme Court upheld a lower court's decision declaring segregation on public buses unconstitutional. Fuck yeah. The Montgomery bus boycott was a key event that influenced both the Democratic and Republican parties' stances on civil rights. While the Democrats were beginning to align themselves more with civil rights, though still facing internal resistance from Southern segregationists, again, the Dixiecrats, Republicans grappled with how to incorporate their traditional values of liberty and equality into concrete support for their movement. The boycott went beyond securing a legal victory against segregated buses. It demonstrated the effectiveness of sustained peaceful protests and laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement that would follow. It was a beacon for similar movements across the South and the nation, fueling the fight for equality and justice that would define the era. All right, so before we get into the civil rights movement, for technically, it happens, or I guess like while it's happening, we do have something going on in the 60s at the same time. So in 1961, we have the Vietnam War, which would span from the 60s to early 70s, or 1973 is when it technically ended. This was a prolonged conflict that not only tested America's foreign policy resolve, but also deeply divided the nation's political landscape. The war began under Democratic President John F. Kennedy, and it would escalate significantly under his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, after Kennedy gets his head popped off, and eventually concluded during the administration of Republican President Richard Nixon. Throughout these years, both major political parties faced intense internal strife over U.S. involvement in Vietnam, with the growing anti-war movement challenging the status quo, with a lot of bros being like, "Oh, dude, like peace, man. We shouldn't be in Vietnam. Yeah, dude." Which, I mean, we kind of shouldn't have been. I don't know. Maybe we should have been. I have uncles, great uncles who fought in Vietnam, and I don't know. Their thoughts on it are like necessary, but the way we went about it was awful. So in the early 1960s, the conflict in Vietnam was seen by many in Washington as a crucial front in the Cold War. The quote-unquote domino theory postulated that the fall of South Vietnam to communism would lead to the spread of communism throughout Southeast Asia. Initially, the involvement was limited to military advisors sent by Kennedy, but the commitment deepened following the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964. Lyndon B. Johnson, after inheriting the presidency, after, again, Kennedy, had his brain splattered all over his wife. Sorry, probably shouldn't make light of that, but fuck it. It escalated U.S. involvement dramatically, leading to a peak of over 500,000 American troops in Vietnam by 1968. The Johnson administration's policies were initially supported by a bipartisan consensus that sought to contain communism. It was a common enemy, communism. Still kind of is a common enemy in some ways. And now the common enemy for most sides is either socialism or perceived communism is what I like to call it. Socialism is not communism, guys. Socialism is there to take care of people, not make everyone, give up their money to everyone else. So it's such a dumb. Who cares? Okay, anyway, I should say who cares. I care. I care very heavily about that. So, however, as the war dragged on, with rising American casualties and costs, coupled with the absence of clear progress, this consensus began to fracture. First-hand accounts from the soldiers on the ground, like those detailed in the oral histories collected by the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Fund, painted a picture of a grueling and complex war. Far removed from the political debates back home, these soldiers often returned to a nation in turmoil. Their service was overshadowed by the larger controversies of war. Stuff like, people accusing them of being baby killers, accusing them of, just being awful. So they went to war for their country because they were told to. In some ways were kind of forced to. If you want to be a law-abiding citizen in some ways. And they were, I guess I shouldn't say law-abiding because if you wanted to be a law-abiding citizen, in some ways, due to the draft, they had to fight, and they were spit on, mistreated, horribly by the public, by rich white men, because they went and fought for rich white men, essentially, arguing over what government was God's will or Satan's will, essentially, is the view between communism and capitalism. But the anti-war movement was fueled by distressing media coverage, such as the Tet Offensive and the My Lai Massacre, which began to gain a ton of traction in the U.S. Influential figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. voiced opposition, linking the civil rights struggle to the anti-war cause. There's a good movement here. Well, a good idea here to link it to that. It gets more coverage this way. So he said, "I speak out against this war, not in anger, but with anxiety and sorrow in my heart, and above all, with a passionate desire to see our beloved country stand as the moral example of the world." Basically viewing the war as immoral, which it kind of was. The Democratic Party, which had escalated the war, began to see deep divisions as the anti-war faction gained strength. Prominent senators like Eugene McCarthy and Robert F. Kennedy challenged Johnson's Vietnam policies, leading to Johnson's decision to not to seek re-election in 1968. The 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago became a flashpoint as protests turned violent and the party struggled to unite behind a candidate. They couldn't find someone to unite behind because the Democrats were viewed as the warmongers at this point, and the Republicans were like, we get to keep this going. So they capitalized on it. Over Vietnam, like the disarray that they had. And Nixon's 1968 presidential campaign promised to restore law and order and achieve peace with honor in Vietnam. So that's how they did it. So then that coupled with a couple other things. But before we get more into Nixon's campaign, let's take a step back. So 1964, as this war is raging on, we do have the Civil Rights Act that would happen. It stands as one of the most consequential pieces of legislation in American history. It was signed into law by Democratic President Lyndon B. Johnson on July 2nd. It aimed to end segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This act was the culmination of a long civil rights movement marked by struggles, sacrifices, and the relentless pursuit of equality. The bill's journey through Congress was arduous, encountering staunch opposition, particularly from the Dixiecrats, the Southern Democrats, who were determined to maintain the segregationist social order of the Jim Crow South. The act's passage required a coalition of moderate and liberal Democrats and Republicans who were compelled by the moral urgency of the civil rights movement, which had exposed the injustices of segregation to the nation and the world. Because again, a lot of the shit that was happening, people, northern states, the white people there, they didn't see that shit all the time. They didn't really care because it didn't affect them. They were able to essentially turn a blind eye to it and, not see the injustices that were being enacted upon the African American community. And so the civil rights movement, what Martin Luther King did was expose all of that. He took the southern state's dark, dirty closet and ripped it wide open, shined a light in there, showed all the bullshit that was going on. And so it was a good thing. It was a really good thing what he did. That's why he died too. He was killed for it. So first-hand accounts of the period, like those of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., underscored the significance of the act. King described the legislation as a second emancipation, highlighting its potential to transform American society. Yet it was not just prominent leaders who felt the weight of the moment. Ordinary Americans like Fannie Lou Hamer, who testified about the brutality she endured while trying to register to vote in Mississippi, brought personal testimony to the foray, making the case for change. The role of President Johnson, a Southerner himself, was crucial. Despite fears that supporting the act would cost the Democratic Party the South, which was, a good way to get elected, they needed those electoral votes, Johnson leveraged his considerable political acumen to navigate the bill through a divided Congress. His famous remark, "We have lost the South for a generation," upon signing the act, acknowledged the political cost, but underscored his commitment to civil rights. He is like, fuck it. fuck it. I don't care. We don't need it. People need these rights. Democrats don't have to always win. What a brave way to do that. So, good for him. It's good. So the Act's passage was also a testament to the bipartisan efforts that were necessary to overcome the filibuster staged by Southern segregationists. Republican Senate Minority Leader Everett Dirksen played a pivotal role, arguing that the act was an essential step towards fulfilling the promise of the Declaration of Independence. His leadership helped secure the Republican votes needed to break the filibuster. The Civil Rights Act's legacy was far-reaching, reshaping American society by dismantling the legal framework of segregation and setting a precedent for future anti-discrimination legislation. It signaled a profound shift in the Democratic Party, which would increasingly align itself with civil rights and social justice causes, despite the alienation of its Southern base. Conversely, the Republican Party began to attract more conservative Southern voters who felt abandoned by the Democrats' embrace of civil rights, contributing to the political realignment that redefined the American South. So if FDR started this political shift, civil rights and Nixon are about to end the shift, and just this is what will cause Texas from voting Democrat to Republican, right? Or like Mississippi and all these other ones. So the act also catalyzed changes within the African American electorate. While many African Americans had historically voted Republican since the Civil War, the party's shifting stances and civil rights prompted a significant realignment, with African Americans becoming a key Democratic voting bloc. The signing of the Civil Rights Act was not just a legislative victory. It was a moral and social essential moment that affirmed the nation's commitment to equality and justice. It challenged Americans to live up to their founding ideals and proved that sustained activism coupled with political courage could lead to transformative change. It just takes forever here, apparently, because of racist assholes. Okay. And then in 1965, we have the Voting Rights Act that would be passed. So it was designed to overcome legal barriers at the state and local levels that prevented African Americans from exercising their right to vote, as guaranteed under the 15th Amendment. The legislation was enacted during a period of intense civil rights activism, including the Selma to Montgomery marches, which brought national attention to the issue of voting rights. That's right, even after the Civil Rights Act, there's still a bunch of voting rights issues. It's really fucked. But I mean, after the Civil Rights Act, they were like, "Fuck, we gotta fix the rest of this shit." So it was signed into law by President Johnson, Lyndon B. Johnson again, LBJ, a Democrat, Democrat, August 6, 1965, after he had previously secured the passage of the Civil Rights Act. So after all that went down, he viewed it as the basic right without which all others are meaningless. He's right. Like if they don't have this right to vote, all of your other rights mean shit because your state can fuck you over. It was proven time and time again after the 16th, 17th Amendments. All of those amendments were passed. It doesn't matter. The South kept finding ways to fuck you over. So first-hand accounts of the era's struggles for voting rights are vivid and often harrowing. Civil rights workers, including individuals like Fannie Lou Hamer and John Lewis, testified to the intimidation, violence, and bureaucratic obstacles they faced when attempting to register black voters in the South. Their personal stories of courage and determination were instrumental in galvanizing the public support for legislation. It was good because people, again, through people like Fannie Lou and John Lewis were able to show hey, we literally get death threats and people would be killed if they tried to register to vote. they're trying to intimidate us to quiet us and take away our voice. It's really fucked up. The act outlawed discriminatory voting practices adopted in many southern states after the Civil War, including literacy tests as a prerequisite to voting. One of its most powerful features was Section 5, which required jurisdictions with a history of discrimination to obtain federal approval or pre-clearance before implementing any changes to their voting laws or practices. Good on you, Section 5. So, the bipartisan support for the Voting Rights Act was significant, with both Republican and Democratic lawmakers recognizing the fundamental importance of protecting voting rights. Everett Dirksen, the Republican Senate minority leader, played a pivotal role in breaking the filibuster against the act, as he had done with the Civil Rights Act the year before. Again, more filibusters by Southern Democrats. So this also would mark the acceleration of political realignment in the United States. Many Southern Democrats, these Dixiecrats, would fiercely oppose civil rights legislation began to defect to the Republican Party. As the Republican Party were like, hey, we can't be, again, remember that the anti-federalist ideals started to creep up more and more in the Republican Party. And they're like, hey, we're overreaching. We're really overreaching. Holy fuck, we're overreaching right now, is how they were feeling. So and so they would keep switching here. And then we'd have the Great Society programs that LBJ would set out. So this was kind of like the last straw for Southern Democrats, right? The Great Society was an ambitious series of policy initiatives, programs, and legislation launched by President Lyndon B. Johnson with the aim of eliminating poverty and racial injustice in the United States. Announced during a 1964 commencement address to the University of Michigan, the Great Society's sweeping vision would lead to transformative changes in American society. It represented an expression of the federal government's role in several key areas of public life. It sought to address issues ranging from healthcare and education to urban problems and the environment. The initiative built upon the foundation of the New Deal, further solidifying the Democratic Party's identity as the party of comprehensive social welfare and reform. FDR started it, and this is cementing it. Goddamn. First-hand accounts from legislators and policy advisors of the time reflect the heady optimism and sense of purpose that characterized the Great Society's early days. Joseph A. Califano Jr., who served as Johnson's chief assistant for domestic affairs, recalled, "There was a feeling that government had the power to be transformative, that society's ills could be addressed through legislation and action." Key components of the Great Society included the war on poverty, which led to the creation of programs such as Medicare and Medicaid, the Food Stamp Act, and the Economic Opportunity Act, which established the Office of Economic Opportunity to oversee programs assisting the poor. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act aimed to improve education for children from low-income families, and the Higher Education Act increased federal funding for universities, and it provided scholarships and established low-interest loans for students. Great things. And Republicans fucking hated it. I don't understand how people view the Great Society as this terrible, awful thing. Its ideas are necessary to create a higher level of citizenship, or citizenry within the country. People who are more educated will be more creative, will find better solutions and aid the country in its development, as opposed to people who are less educated. Less educated countries are third world countries, and we are slowly slipping into being a less educated country, which sucks. It sucks so hard. It's so sad. I don't like that. I want America to be good. I want America to have these ideals again, that we take care of each other and we help each other grow as people, and we don't just push each other down to the curb. So fucking depressing. Civil rights legislation was also a crucial part of the Great Society agenda. The Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, also known as the Fair Housing Act, sought to address and eliminate discrimination, segregation of voting, housing, and the workplace. So, despite Johnson's ambitious agenda, the Great Society programs were met with significant resistance. Critics, particularly from the Republican Party, argued that extensive federal programs represented a governmental overreach and could lead to dependency on social welfare programs, essentially creating lazy people. Senator Barry Goldwater, the Republican presidential nominee in 1964, epitomized this viewpoint, asserting that the programs threatened individual freedom and fiscal responsibility. Like, hey, it's the people's job to be fiscally responsible. And yes, while some people may abuse it, not everyone is like that. And if we set up the programs in such a way that all it does really is just give people more opportunity, what is the problem? If it gives you more opportunity and all it's doing is impacting, a few people's trips to Hawaii every now and then, what the fuck is the issue? I don't. Yeah, you can't afford to vacay all the time, just like everybody else can't afford to. That sucks, rich people. I'm sorry. You can still vacation more than me. You just can't do it like every month. That sucks. Like, goddamn. There really shouldn't be an issue with this. It should not be a problem. But people are dragons. People like that are dragons, and they like to hoard everything. So, the onset of the Vietnam War also proved a significant obstacle to the Great Society's implementation. As the war escalated, it diverted both financial resources and public attention. The conflict in Vietnam became a source of increasing division within the Democratic Party and eroded Johnson's political capital. So all the good things he was trying to do got fucked over because of their involvement in the Vietnam War, because they really believed in the Vietnam War. So in retrospect, this overhaul had a very mixed legacy. It led to significant reductions in poverty rates and laid the groundwork for many aspects of modern welfare state. However, some programs did not achieve their intended results, and the initiatives became a focal point in debates over the size and role of the federal government, a debate that continues to influence the stances of the Democratic and Republican parties to this day. And it's created more division in this country than a lot of things. So, okay, we're finally here. So we have Richard Nixon's Southern strategy in 1968. So during the 1968 presidential election, this was a deliberate political tactic aimed at realigning the Democratic South with the Republican Party. It came in the wake of significant political upheaval and civil rights achievements, which had left many white Southern voters feeling alienated from the Democratic Party they once dominated. The strategy sought to capitalize on the resentment felt by these voters towards the federal government's civil rights initiatives, such as the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Nixon's campaign rhetoric emphasized law and order and states' rights, which, while not explicitly mentioning race, resonated with Southern white voters concerned about the federal government's involvement in desegregation and civil rights enforcement. That's right. So, when people say, hey, Republicans are racist, this is why. Because they explicitly were like, hey, we should let states be able to determine what they want to do. During a time when states were just told, hey, you can't be segregating people anymore. That would be why, guys. It's not just because they're white, it's because of like their political stances at the time. First-hand accounts from the time reveal how the Republican Party began to shift its focus under Nixon. Kevin Phillips, a political strategist for Nixon, detailed in an interview how the Republican Party could win without the support of African Americans by gaining the votes of Southern whites. He said, from now on, the Republicans are never going to get more than 10 to 20% of the, he said, he used the word Negro. I don't like that word, but he used the word Negro vote. So African American community vote. Again, not me saying that, just quoting him. But that's the word he used. And that's why they suck. And he continued saying, and they don't need any more than that. They we only need 10 to 20% of you. Phillips confidently stated, fucking asshole, smug asshole. And the Southern strategy marked a significant departure from the Republican Party's traditional stance as the party of Lincoln, which had championed the abolition of slavery and fought for the rights of African Americans during Reconstruction. Nixon's approach was a response to the evolving dynamics of American politics and reflected a growing division along racial and geographic lines. While the Republican Party may not have intended on getting rid of the Civil Rights Act or, amending any of that, they certainly weren't going to, say they were going to do more, right? They definitely made it a point to be like, hey, listen, we're not going to be fucking with your guys' states' rights, right? We're going to let you guys live the way you want to live. To all these racist fuckers. And that's why they would get them. They They didn't have to explicitly state the whole truth, which was they probably weren't going to fuck with it, but they certainly, were going to make it look like they might, or like they weren't going to do anything if they tried to do anything about it later. So that, again, this is why Republicans are viewed, some Republicans are viewed as racist, just because of this. And a lot of people alive from the 60s, a lot of people from the Republican Party from the 60s are in office still. I think there's 13 currently that have been in office since the 60s, and some of them are Democrat and some of them are Republican. And it's just kind of crazy that they've been in a political office for that long. So Democrats, particularly in the South, faced an identity crisis as the party began to fracture. The once solid Democratic South began to crumble as traditional Democratic voters, unhappy with the party's progressive stance on civil rights, started to defect. The party was increasingly seen as aligning with the interests of minority groups, the anti-war movement, and liberal causes. So the long-term effects of the Southern strategy were profound. It contributed to the Republican Party's transformation and played a role in the subsequent decades' political realignments. The strategy laid the groundwork for Republican dominance in the presidential elections in the South, a trend that persisted well into the 21st century. And that's right. Yeah, I mean, even today, the South mostly votes Republican. We're starting to see kind of a shift with more Southern states and more traditionally Republican states leaning towards Democratic tendencies now, mostly due to the extreme nature and polarization of politics. I'll kind of get into that at the end of the episode and give my take on it, but we're going to continue anyways. So critics of the Southern strategy argue that it exploited racial tensions to gain votes, which it did. A charge that has continued to fuel debates over the role of race in American politics. Supporters, however, contended that the strategy was about respecting states' rights and responding to concerns over federal overreach. So the classic anti-federalist ideals. They're like, no, it's not racist. We're just anti-federalist, which were racist for a while. Oh my God. Okay. The 1968 election, and they seceded from the Union. Those guys. Fucking assholes. So yeah, the 1968 election and Nixon's Southern strategy within it remains one of the most studied and controversial strategies in American political history. It symbolizes the complexities and consequences of political realignment and the interplay of race, region, and party ideology that continue to shape the political discourse in the United States. And that is where typically I'd end, but we're going to kind of go into a few more things because really I just showed you. I feel like by now you should understand how and why Republicans and Democrats shifted and flipped the way they did. That was a very good, explanation of things, right? That breakdown right there. However, we're going to get into a few more things because Nixon would fuck up and cause a lot of people to reevaluate some things with Watergate and the Pentagon Papers mostly. So the leak of the Pentagon Papers in 1971 exposed a series of classified documents that provided an in-depth look at the United States' political and military involvement in Vietnam from 1945 to 1967. The revelations contained in these papers significantly eroded public trust in the government and heightened skepticism about America's role in the Vietnam War. The documents, officially titled United States-Vietnam Relations 1945 to 1967, a study prepared by the Department of Defense, were a detailed account of the country's military engagement in the Southeast Asia. They were leaked by Daniel Ellsberg, a former military analyst who had grown increasingly disillusioned with the war. Which, I mean, if you had those papers, I would have been too. So, first-hand accounts from journalists like Neil Sheehan, who helped break the story for the New York Times, captured the urgency and gravity of the situation. He would say, "We knew we had explosive material." He was right. He was reflecting on the moment the decision was made to publish the documents. The Pentagon Papers revealed the successive administrations had not only misled the American public about the degree of U.S. involvement in Vietnam, but also had harbored doubts about the war's success internally. They knew they weren't going to win. This stark contrast between public statements and private assessments led to widespread outrage and fueled anti-war sentiment. The Nixon administration's attempt to prevent the publication of the Pentagon Papers on grounds of national security was met with a fierce legal battle that culminated in the Supreme Court ruling in favor of the press. The case, New York Times Company versus United States, became a landmark decision upholding the First Amendment rights of free press against prior restraint. by the government. And the government essentially tried to shut up the free press, but if the free press get a hold of something, they should be allowed to report it, which is good. That is a good thing. We should be able to, call a spade and, not have the government trick us into believing that they are always right. It's so dumb that Nixon tried to do that. And he was like, oh, we can't have people know that for bad. How dare they? Nixon. The Pentagon Papers' impact extended beyond the immediate shockwaves that they sent through the political landscape. They contributed to a growing atmosphere of distrust toward the federal government, an era that some have dubbed the credibility gap. This term, already in use during the Johnson administration, became even more poignant as the Pentagon Papers laid bare the extent of the deception. It was a lot of deception from both parties. When they agree, and, because the Republicans and the Democrats, the Republicans, even though they're saying, hey, we're with you people, everything that the Democrats are doing is bad, still continued the war. They both agreed that the war was necessary. So when they agree on stuff, maybe we should look into it a little more. Because usually it's something kind of bad. So the fallout from the leak had significant political ramifications for both major parties. Republicans, with Nixon at the helm, faced the immediate crisis and the subsequent Watergate scandal, which would lead to Nixon's resignation, impeachment, technically. He was impeached, let's be honest. He was going to get impeached. He's able to resign, but he was impeached. Just whatever. Okay. Listen, you can say resign, but we all know what was going to happen. So Democrats, although not directly implicated in the Pentagon Papers, were not immune to the consequences. The public's eroding trust in the government tarnished the image of both parties and brought about a more cynical and questioning electorate. With both sides being like, no, everybody sucks here. They weren't wrong. Everybody does suck. In the broader context of American politics and culture, the Pentagon Papers played a role in shaping an era of investigative journalism and governmental transparency. The event was a catalyst for change, prompting reforms aimed at increasing oversight of the executive branch and intelligence agencies. The legacy of Pentagon Papers persists as a defining moment when the truth about government actions during the Vietnam War was brought to light. And the rest of the Watergate scandals of Nixon, taping people, using the government to spy on other political opponents, and the government to essentially spy on itself and shit like that, and then lying to the public. Well, that's what the government's best at, right? They're really good at lying to the public. Yeah, shit like that definitely would erode the public trust and their sentiment in the government. So, yay! Okay, and then in 1973, we have Roe v. Wade. Okay. This was a Supreme Court decision. It remains one of the most divisive rulings in American jurisprudence. By legalizing abortion, the court not only ignited a debate on women's reproductive rights, but also drew a deep ideological line between the country's two major political parties, a divide that has only grown over time. So, Republicans were all for not letting abortion happen. The ruling established that the right to choose an abortion was protected under the Constitution's right to privacy, a decision that expanded the freedoms outlined in the Bill of Rights in a way previously unseen. Justice Harry Blackmun, who authored the majority opinion, cited the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which guarantees personal liberty against government action, as a foundational argument. First-hand accounts from the period illustrate the immediate impact of the decision. Women across the country, like Norma McCorvey, known as Jane Roe in the court documents, experienced a newfound autonomy over their bodies and futures. She would say, at last, the law recognized what should be a woman's right, McCorvey later wrote in her autobiography. The ruling came at a time when the women's liberation movement was gaining momentum, and it quickly became a cornerstone issue. Feminist activists championed the decision as a critical victory for women's rights and equality. Gloria Steinman, a leading figure in the movement, hailed the ruling as a necessary step towards the full equality of women. It was. Definitely is. However, Roe v. Wade also galvanized opposition, particularly from conservative and religious groups who saw the decision as a moral outrage and an overreach of judicial power. The ruling gave rise to the pro-life movement, which began to lobby vigorously for the reversal of Roe and the promotion of alternatives to abortion. And yeah, this was a great thing that we did have for a while. And in the past year, this gets, I'll get into that here because, again, we're only going up to the 2000s, but I'll talk about how this gets impacted in the modern times after I'm done at the end of the episode. So while the Democratic Party gradually embraced a pro-choice stance, advocating for reproductive rights as a central tenet of women's health and equality, the Republican Party increasingly aligned with the pro-life position, seeing it as consistent with their promotion of family values and the protection of life. There's this, again, the argument comes down to, is there life at conception? When should we count it as a life? What should we, what do we count to protect? And a lot of this idea of like it's life at conception comes from religious beliefs, not necessarily scientific evidence, but then sometimes the pro-choice movement also forgets that, technically, what we consider to be life is just cells moving around. So like trees are alive, so it's just it's a very complicated, messy issue for sure. I don't think it has, I think women should have the right to choose. I think that definitely should be a private matter, and men should stay the fuck out of it. That's my belief. I don't necessarily have to agree that abortion is okay, but if you choose to do it, I'm not going to judge you for it. I personally, I do, I do have the stance of like, I like babies having the chance to live. When it comes to like rape and like other shit though, like that, clearly that, calls for, abortion to be necessary. Again, it's a complex issue. I think there's a lot of gray there. I don't think it's just a black and white, like, okay, it's this. Besides the fact that it should be a choice by the woman. And it should be something that they aren't persecuted or judged for. That's about it. As far as my opinion goes, and that's all my opinion really matters on is that. So, and to clarify, the reason why I personally wouldn't want my wife to abort is because I like having kids. I know kids aren't for everybody, and when it's our kids, it's our kids. And if we fuck up, we fuck up, and part of that responsibility of fucking up is raising a child. But some people shouldn't have to be responsible, and some people view like, oh hey, I fucked up, I made an accident, I don't want to have to bring this kid in this world and make them feel like their life started out on like a bad foot, which I get to a degree, but it's like, I don't know, that kid, you don't know how that kid's going to feel. Some kids who are adopted do struggle with that issue and some don't. I don't know. It's complicated. And I think people need to start, instead of just blindly echoing things back and forth to each other, need to start like actually looking at, what might be wrong about their stance, or like, considering different positions. But again, at the end of the day, though, it should just be a personal decision. The government, this is something I believe like the government should definitely have no say in at all. So, but this V. Wade decision would spark a realignment of sorts, with voters beginning to cluster around the parties based on their views on abortion. So some religious voters who were Democrat would be like, oh, hey, the Republicans are the ones who agree with my view now, so I'm going to go with the Republicans. So over time, this issue became a litmus test for candidates in both parties, a key point in party platforms and a central subject in subsequent judicial nominations and confirmations. The case's enduring legacy has cemented the abortion debate as a defining social issue in America, affecting elections, legislation, and the very fabric of political discourse. Roe v. Wade did not settle the abortion debate, but rather marked the beginning of a new, more contentious era in American public life, which is very true. They didn't completely settle it because it could be overturned by the Supreme Court like it was. Just stupid. Anyways, the Watergate scandal, culminating in 1974 with the resignation of President Richard Nixon, was an enormous political event that shook the foundation of American politics drastically. It eroded public trust in the federal government nearly completely. Like at this point, this is where everyone starts getting more conspiratorial, right? Like the government is lying to you, has been lying to you actively, and you should not trust them. So the scandal began with the break-in at the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in 1972, and expanded to reveal a larger pattern of abuses of power by the Nixon administration and subsequent cover-up. First-hand accounts from journalists Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein of the Washington Post, who played a crucial role in uncovering the Watergate scandal with Deep Throat, depicted a White House enmeshed in illicit activities ranging from political espionage to sabotage against perceived opponents. The reporting, fueled by the information from an anonymous source known as Deep Throat, later revealed as the FBI Associate Director Mark Felt. Yeah, that's the only way you're getting inside information like that was they were inside. Unveiled a narrative of deception that went to the highest levels of the government. It went to the highest levels. Come on, man. It's all a cover up. They're all lizard people. Fucking pulling out my what's his bucket? They're turning the frogs gay. That guy. But I can't fuck that guy. Anyways, the scandal led to the indictment of several Nixon administration officials and sparked a constitutional crisis that tested the limits of presidential power. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision in United States v. Nixon forced the president to release tape recordings that revealed his involvement in the cover-up, leading to calls for his impeachment. Nixon's resignation on August 8th, 1974 was an unprecedented outcome that sent shockwaves through the political landscape. In a televised address he stated, "I have always tried to do..." Oh, I should read this much. "I have always tried to do what's best for the nation." I see. I had to do the Nixon voice whenever I can. Fighting these assholes, these imbeciles! How dare they? I love the Nixon Futurama guy. He gets it so good. Anyways, as he announced his departure from the highest office in the land, his resignation was the culmination of a saga that eroded the faith Americans placed in the office of the presidency and the integrity of their elected officials. You could be electing in an asshole who's going to lie and cheat. What sucks is Nixon did have some good policies that he was trying to implement. Like he was trying to protect wildlife, help keep pushing for the end of segregation. Technically, kind of lying to his Southern Democrat electorate, but who cares? He fit their religious ideals. But anyways, this was the culmination of a saga that would erode the faith Americans placed in just pretty much all of the government, and it led to the passage of the Ethics and Government Act, the creation of the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, and new laws designed to increase transparency in government and limit abuses of power. Which is a good thing, very good thing. So politically, the scandal dealt a significant blow to the Republican Party, which faced the challenge of rebuilding its credibility in the aftermath of Nixon's resignation. For the Democratic Party, Watergate provided a platform to call for greater accountability in government, although the party also faced the challenge of overcoming public's cynicism and distrust in the wake of the scandal. It's like, oh, great, you're also part of the government, so hi pot. You can call the other kettle black if you want, but you're also black pot, so... It's whatever. Watergate permanently altered the relationship between the government and the governed, the press and the presidency. It has since become synonymous with political scandal and has served as a cautionary tale about the excesses of executive power. The enduring impact of the scandal continues to influence political discourse and fueled a bunch of conspiracy theories. A bunch. I'd say this is the start where we really start seeing a bunch of conspiratorial minds just be like, all right, fuck it. Everything's a lie. I live in a simulation. And now we have science being like, yeah, we might live in a simulation. There was some guy who found code in the universe, basically the fundamental beliefs of quarks. The way they operated was essentially binary code, which is crazy. But it would be really funny if we were a computer program that could create more computer programs. It'd be kind of wild. We essentially create our own video games. Like Baldur's Gate 3, which if you haven't played, you need to play Baldur's Gate 3. That's an amazing game, especially if you like D&D like I do. Anyways, that was besides the point. That was very off topic. I'm sorry, guys. Getting back to it. Okay, in 1980, we had the election of Ronald Reagan. It heralded a new epoch in American politics. characterized by a pronounced shift towards conservative ideology. So particularly in terms of fiscal policy and the role of federal government. Again, just surprised because a lot of this was also due to the previous presidents and how bad the fuck. So the Democratic Party would get elected after Nixon, obviously, right? So like it let them do that, but then the Democratic Party would fuck up, and so there's a lot of issues that were caused. Financial issues. A lot of people felt. Anyways, I'm not going to get too into it, but Ronald Reagan campaigned on a platform that criticized the perceived excesses of government and promised to restore economic health through deregulation, tax cuts, and a reduction in the size of the federal bureaucracy. Goddamn. His message resonated with an electorate that had experienced the economic stagflation of the 1970s, the energy crisis, and disillusionment in the wake of the Vietnam War and the Watergate scandal. First-hand accounts from the time, such as those of Reagan's advisor and speechwriter Peggy Noonan, reflected the optimism of the campaign. She would say, "We will make America great again." And Reagan would also proclaim this, and then Trump would proclaim this, encapsulating his vision of a renewed, economically robust, and globally respected United States. Reagan's victory. Isn't it weird how Trump literally just took Reagan's campaign and just used that to win? He just copy-pasted his campaign for the most part. It's crazy. He probably just saw like, oh, hey, that shit with like people, not trusting Obama and like in the government, and especially after Edward Snowden came out. Oh my God, we just had like almost a repeat in Watergate, didn't we? That's all the 2016 election was. It was just a repeat of Watergate, and then Reagan running again. But this time, instead of Reagan, it was Trump. Holy shit. Anyways, sorry, I just had that revelation. Like, you guys are hearing that in 4K. Reagan's victory over the incumbent Democratic president, Jimmy Carter, was decisive. People hated Jimmy Carter. A lot of people still hate Jimmy Carter, marking a significant realignment in American politics. My grandpa still hates Jimmy Carter. The Reagan Revolution, as it came to be known, was supported by the Reagan Democrats, traditionally Democratic voters who supported Reagan's policies. It was indicative of the powerful appeal of Reagan's platform and the desire for change after years of economic and international challenges. Most of this was due to a lot of those Reagan Democrats being more moderate instead of like fully Democratic. They were more on the we were Republicans, but Republicans are, they fucked up. And, no, we were Democrats, but Jimmy Carter fucked up. And, I can see the need now, or, just different shit like that. When you're moderate, you can kind of flip flop between two places. So the Reagan's administration policies, which came to be known as Reaganomics, focused on supply-side economics, the belief that reducing taxes on businesses and the wealthy would stimulate the investment and production, leading to economic growth and benefits for all segments of society. Trickle-down doctrine, essentially. The wealthy would spend their money, and that wealth would trickle down to everybody else if we, stayed out of it and kept them wealthy. Which, to an extent, kind of, but not really. As we see now, as we now know, trickle-down doctrine doesn't work, especially with the worker consumer becoming a big thing, especially with like Amazon and shit. Reagan also championed a strong national defense and took a hard-line stance against the Soviet Union, declaring it the evil empire and ramping up defense spending. He's really good at slogans. You know how to place a slogan and get people to repeat it. Good for him, I guess. On the social front, Reagan's presidency saw the rise of the religious right as a political force, reflecting the country's conservative turn on social issues. Religion, always been playing a role in politics for fucking ever. The religious right would cause a lot of social issues. So his tenure was marked by opposition to abortion, the promotion of traditional family values, and a war on drugs that would have significant long-term implications for domestic policy, and was mostly just racist because the people who were using marijuana or other recreational drugs were impoverished people, and people who were impoverished were mostly people of color. So, fuck the war on drugs. It's a dumb war that it was not necessary. If we would regulate it and allow people to take recreational drugs, if they abuse it. But if we gave better education about it instead of being like, oh, it's bad for you, don't do it. I mean, alcohol is bad for you, but people like doing it and they can drink responsibly. People can do drugs responsibly. I don't understand why that's such a complex issue to comprehend, right? There are maybe certain drugs that are very dangerous, like meth and heroin. That, yeah, maybe don't do, right? But people who are addicted to it are going to do it. It does not matter. And a lot of that was caused by opioids. So fuck you too if you have issues with that. The 1980 election was a turning point for the Democratic Party as well. Like, seriously, if you have issues with that, I don't listen to my show. Get out of here. The loss prompted a period of introspection and gradual centrist shift, with some in the party advocating for a new approach that would be realized with the election of Bill Clinton in 1992. Ronald Reagan's re-election can be seen as the moment when the Republican Party firmly cemented its place as the standard bearer of conservative policies. They became conservative. That is it. That is what they are. They're conservative now. They're not necessarily one like anti-federalist or federalist. They are conservative, which is really just anti-federalists. That's what they are. The era of conservative dominance that Reagan's presidency initiated was characterized by a focus on free market principles, a move towards deregulation, and a reinvigorated patriotism that played out against the backdrop of the Cold War's final years. So, the legacy of Reagan's subsequent presidency continued to influence political discourse and policy today. Again, literally, Trump copy-pasted his shit, right? Like, it's crazy. And let's talk about something that gets passed by Reagan here. It's the Immigration Reform and Control Act. The IRCA of 1986 represented a major overhaul of U.S. immigration policy and a rare moment of bipartisan agreement on this contentious issue. It was signed into law by Ronald Reagan. The act provided an amnesty to millions of undocumented immigrants who had entered the country prior to 1982, contingent upon them meeting certain conditions. The IRCA aimed to curb illegal immigration by penalizing employers who knowingly hired undocumented workers, thus addressing one of the key magnets drawing immigrants to the United States. It also sought to secure the border and create a better pathway for legal immigration, reflecting a comprehensive approach to the complex issue. They took a complex issue and were like, hey, we need to break this down and actually make a good solution for it. Good on them. So first-hand accounts of the period, including statements from Reagan, reveal a willingness to acknowledge the contributions of undocumented immigrants and a desire to resolve their precarious status. Reagan described the IRCA as a means to bring millions of people out of the shadows and into the sunlight where they can live with dignity and self-respect. Where they can live in America and not hide anymore, right? And then vote for me. Yeah. The bipartisan nature of the act was evident in the cooperation between Republican and Democratic legislators. A sentiment encapsulated by then-Senator Alan Simpson, a Republican co-sponsor of the bill, who worked closely with Democratic Representative Romano Mazzoli to craft the legislation. Mazzoli! No wonder the Italian wanted this to... No, I'm kidding. Sorry, Italians feel like they're discriminated against, and I don't know, maybe to some extent they are. That's why the mafia gets formed, but I just always find it when Italians are like, people hate me because I'm Italian. I mean, so the Irish... People hated the Irish, right? It's like if you weren't British, they hated the Irish. Everyone got discriminated against in some form or the other if you were an immigrant to the country, unless you were British, and then you fucked over the natives. So really, basically, if you weren't from England, you were going to be slightly discriminated against. Sucked. Anyways, the bill was seen as a pragmatic solution necessary to restore the integrity of the U.S. immigration law. The act's provision for amnesty was particularly significant. It allowed eligible undocumented immigrants to appeal for legal status, which included temporary residence, followed by the opportunity to apply for a green card, and ultimately citizenship. This provision was a recognition of the reality that millions of undocumented immigrants had become an integral part of American society and the economy. They were workers. They were, doing a lot of jobs that a lot of people didn't want to do. They were construction workers. They were railroad workers. They were whatever, They were part of America's fabric. And so they realized, hey, we needed to give them this opportunity to become a citizen, which is good. However, it should be noted that this is a very complex legacy here. While it addressed immediate concerns, its enforcement mechanisms, particularly employer sanctions, proved less effective than hoped. The act also did not substantially stem the flow of future undocumented immigration, partly because it did not create flexible legal pathways to match the United States' economic demand for labor. Because, a lot of people were starting their businesses and jobs, and they needed people. And maybe they couldn't afford to hire a bunch of, people with college degrees who needed to, who needed good pay for their education and their level that they were at. So, looking back, really, at this all, though, the IRCA represented a Republican stance on immigration that differs significantly from the more stringent positions often associated with the party today. This shift reflects broader changes in the political landscape and public sentiment regarding immigration over the past several decades. Sorry, even like this stance like shifted hard. Like even during the Bush administration, they were still like, hey, yeah, no, immigrants are people, like they need to come in here. Because they agreed with Reagan's, the Reagan Republican Party. It's weird. The Republican Party has taken so many shifts over the past, like almost 5 decades now, that I should say like 6 or 7 because of Nixon, like 6 decades. It's continually evolving and changing. I feel like it's becoming more and more extreme. I feel like everyone agrees with that sentiment. And then there are people being like, no, it's not. Like, what are you talking about? You don't know what you're talking about. Like, what do you mean I don't know what I'm talking about? I look at history. I see where these people were. We are way the fuck over here now with what we're saying. And maybe it's because, like, you see the issue that arised from this solution now. And so you're taking a harder stance to it now because you think the solution didn't solution it enough. It didn't solve the problem well enough. And so that's why you feel like you have to go further into a certain extreme or spectrum because the solution didn't fit with what you wanted it to do. When in all reality, the solution just needs to be slightly amended, or really we should just allow immigrants to come in and then fucking regulate them the same way we regulate our citizens. We have plenty of American citizens who are able to be criminals, and there are plenty of citizens of other countries who are, able to become criminals and not be criminals. It's same individual by individual basis that should be looked upon, and not just, oh, you're from this country, so you're more than likely like a criminal. Like, no, what the fuck? No. There are good people everywhere, and there are bad people everywhere. Doesn't matter where you're from. It's sad. Unless you're in North Korea, I'm kidding. No, unless you're Dutch, then you're just a bad person. Sorry, Dutch people, but you suck. No, I'm kidding. I love Dutch people. Dutch people are cool. Lots of people are Dutch that I knew. Okay, in 1994, we have the Republican Revolution. So the midterm elections of 1994, often referred to as this revolution, marked a significant shift in the political landscape for the U.S. For the first time in 40 years, the Republican Party gained control of both the House of Representatives and the Senate. Which is crazy. And this is right after Bill Clinton was like, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. So, yeah, and this is why. Because Bill Clinton got his dick sucked, and people were upset that he got his dick sucked while in office and then lied about it. He lied while in office. And yes, people in that office should be scrutinized to a much higher degree. I agree. But goddamn, he should have he should have been able to admit on camera, yeah, I had an affair, and I don't know. Unless, was he abusing his power on her? I actually haven't looked into that as much. I need to look into that more to see if it was like an abuse of like an employer essentially forcing a secretary to be like, listen, you want this job, baby, you gotta use your mouth a little more. If it's that case, disgusting, definitely deserve to get impeached for that. But if it wasn't that, and it was a mutual thing, and I don't know. It's such a weird thing where it's like image is important for the party, so I get why they'd want to impeach him then. I have a hard time with that, where it's like it's people's bedroom affairs. As long as it's not like affecting job performance to some degree, it's a complicated issue. It's complicated when it affects like an employee, which technically it was. Yeah, you know what? Maybe never mind. He deserved it. Bill Clinton needed to get impeached for that shit. Never mind. I'm going to change my stance on that. He definitely needed to get impeached for that. That was wrong. So you also listened to that in 4K. Congrats. You watching me change my stance as I go through it. So but I definitely do need to look into it more to form a actual like concrete opinion on like this is what I believe. Because again, I just haven't known enough. But anyways, so after that, people were kind of sick of Democrats for a little bit here. So the electoral triumph was largely attributed to the Contract with America, which is a document unveiled by Republican leaders before the election that outlined their legislative agenda. It was an innovative campaign strategy that provided a clear and concise plan of action, promising smaller government, fiscal responsibility, welfare reform, and a tougher stance on crime. So first-hand accounts from figures like Newt Gingrich, the Georgia congressman who became a Speaker of the House following the election, illustrated the Republicans' commitment to fundamentally altering the direction of federal policy. Gingrich described the contract with America as the first step toward renewing American civilization. The Republican Revolution was a direct challenge to President Bill Clinton's administration and the Democratic Party's progressive policies. Voters' concerns about Clinton's healthcare reform plans and other initiatives were seen as overreaching, fueling a perception of Democrats as proponents of big government, quote unquote big government. And that's been used since then. The Republican victory was seen as a mandate for change, and it had immediate and tangible effects. The new Republican majority in Congress pursued an aggressive agenda, leading to confrontations with the White House, most notably resulting in government shutdowns in 1995 and 1996 over budget disputes. And this has continued again since then, and it keeps happening. So fun. However, the revolution also led to legislative successes and compromises. One of the most significant was the Welfare Reform Act of 1996, which Clinton signed into law, fulfilling a campaign promise and reflecting a centrist shift in his policy approach. The 1994 midterm elections were a turning point for both parties. The Republican Party's successes solidified the conservative shift that had been building since Reagan's presidency, reinforcing the GOP's image as the party of conservative fiscal and social policies. Again, more conservative, like slow and steady approach. They were the tortoise. And for Democrats, the loss prompted a period of recalibration, with the party shifting to more centrist positions on several issues, a strategy that would contribute to Clinton's re-election in 1996. And let him get his penis sucked in office. Okay, so then in the 2000s, they were marked by pronounced ideological polarization in American politics, with the Republican Party moving further to the right and Democratic Party shifting towards a more progressive stance, particularly on social issues. This period saw each party's base demand greater adherence to their core principles, leading to a more distinct ideological divide in the American electorate. This is where we start getting red team, blue team. Are you on the red team or are you on the blue team? That's what matters. Republican Party shift was characterized by consolidation of conservative ideals, with an increased emphasis on issues such as tax cuts, smaller government, strict constitutionalism, and traditional family values. The smaller government and strict constitutionalism always get me. The traditional family values. It's like, what the fuck is traditional? Nothing's traditional. The Greeks, one of the oldest civilizations in the world, never had a very traditional family. Fuck off with that, man. It's what the Puritans determined what was traditional. Catholic, religion determined traditional family, and fuck that. So we have the rise of the Tea Party movement in the late 2000s that exemplified this shift as a vocal faction within the GOP, which pushed for more aggressive conservatism, particularly on fiscal matters. They cared more about money, which is a good thing. Fiscally, Republicans are sometimes good. Sometimes. We do need to have a good defense budget. We do, right? Maybe we don't need 64 brand new F-35s though. Like I was joking about. I don't need an F-35 to peg me at night. Okay, it's not needed. So anyways, from this early time when most of us were alive, and I was alive during this time. I was born in 1997 is when I was born. So there we go. Out at how old I am. So enjoy that. You're getting this from someone who's born in the 90s. But I do read history and I do study a lot. So hopefully and I did go to college and I did study history in college. So, fuck you if you want to argue with me. And I did it from a state college. So again, fuck you if you want to argue with me. I did study this quite a bit. I am trying to be as unbiased as possible. When it gets into this stuff, it's more of like, I disagree with this idea, but this is what was done. Okay. First-hand accounts from the era, such as those from Republican leaders like House Speaker John Boehner, illustrate the internal pressures to toe a conservative line. Boehner, and then Herner. Boehner. Boehner. Okay. John Boehner often faced challenges from within his party to steer a more conservative course, indicative of shifting priorities of the GOP base. Conversely, the Democratic Party saw a surge in its liberal wing's influence, spurred by growing calls for social justice, environmental protection, and expanded healthcare access. The presidency of Barack Obama, beginning in 2009, brought many of these issues to the forefront, with significant moments like the passing of the Affordable Care Act, commonly known as Obamacare. And you know what? Let me go ahead and actually get into Obamacare right now, because a lot of people hate it. Let me pull this up real quick. Okay, so the Affordable Care Act was an initiative to it wanted to provide more affordable health insurance coverage for all Americans. Like, everyone should be able to have health insurance, right? That's the idea. In all reality, we should just make healthcare in my opinion, it should be pretty much free. It should just be something that we all chip into so everybody can have access to doctors. Fuck you if you don't use doctors. Good for you. You don't need to, but if you live in this country, a lot of other people do. Okay? That's just how it is. It's the same way like everybody else uses roads. You may not use roads as much as someone else, but you may need to use the road eventually. And so you should pay for it. Same fucking concept. Okay. The pros. So that are argued, right? So more Americans have healthcare. So there's been more than 16 Americans that have 16 million. Sorry. Yeah. Obviously more than 16 Americans, 16 million Americans that were able to attain health insurance coverage within the first 5 years of the ACA or Obamacare. Health insurance is more affordable for many people now. So insurance companies must now spend at least 80% of insurance premiums on medical care and improvements. The ACA also aims to prevent insurers from making unreasonable rate increases. Awesome. That's really good. Insurance companies shouldn't be able to fucking do that. People with pre-existing health conditions can no longer be denied coverage. This is amazing because cancer patients were getting fucked over by insurance companies and not being able to be provided health care because they had a pre-existing cancer condition. How ridiculous is that? And under the ACA, you can't be denied coverage. So a lot of the rhetoric of people, blasting Obamacare comes from these insurance companies who are like, oh, this is government overreach. These people being assholes. No, this is a necessary thing. It doesn't do enough. It does nowhere near enough, in my opinion. But it was at least something. It was a step towards something. There's no time limits. No time limits exist on care. So before the ACA, some people with chronic health problems ran out of insurance coverage. Insurance companies set limits on the amount of money they would spend on an individual consumer. Insurance companies can no longer maintain a preset dollar limit on the coverage they provide their customers. Awesome. Okay, more screenings are also covered under the ACA. That's great. So healthier consumers will lead to lower costs over time. For example, a diabetes screening and an early treatment may help prevent costly and debilitating treatment later, which is true. It would save people and insurance companies more money if they would just take care of early screening, make it affordable for people to go to the doctor and not feel like they're going to lose an arm and a leg every time they go. Doesn't that make sense? Wow. Weird concept. Prescription drugs cost less. The ACA promised to make prescription drugs more affordable. Many people, particularly senior citizens, are unable to afford all their medications. The number of prescription and generic drugs covered by the ACA is growing every year. So, Medicare beneficiaries have saved over $26.8 billion in prescription drugs under Obamacare. Okay, now here are the cons. Many people have to pay higher premiums. So insurance companies now provide a wider range of benefits and cover people with pre-existing conditions. This has caused premiums to rise for a lot of people who already had health insurance, which, that fucking sucks. But at the same time, those insurance companies did that because their bottom line was being affected and their business model was like, oh, I'm not making as much money anymore. So fuck the people that have us. That was not the government doing that. That was a choice made by the higher ups in insurance companies to make sure that they kept their money. Their executives got to go to Cabo whenever they wanted. I keep using Cabo because I just can't think of other vacation places right now that's like foreign and not Hawaii. And I want to just say Hawaii all the time. So the other issue with Obamacare is you can be fined if you don't have insurance. So the goal of Obamacare is for people to be insured year round. If you're uninsured and don't obtain an exemption, you must pay a modest fine. Recent events have changed this fine, and beginning with the tax year in 2019, it will be eliminated. So, it was supposed to be eliminated. Some people think it's intrusive for the government to require health insurance, and ACA supporters argue that not having insurance passes your healthcare costs onto everyone else, which is true. So if you don't have health insurance, everyone else is going to then have to pay for your bullshit. But at the same time, if we just made healthcare free in America, which we definitely have the funds for, and we can do it. That'd be awesome. That'd be great. And those insurance companies, they'd have to find other fucking jobs. And I hope they do, because a lot of them are fucking evil, especially pharmaceutical companies that raise the price of prescription drugs. Fuck them. I don't care if they lose their jobs. They're evil pieces of shit. Anybody that charges people that need life-saving medication premium because it's life-saving, they have to buy it, is evil, in my opinion. Okay. And then taxes going up as a result of ACA. Yeah, and that's fair. Yeah, that's great. The taxes should go up, and people who make more money should have to pay more taxes too. So, fuck it. And that's just the way it works. That's the way society works. If you make more, your contribution to society has a greater impact. The amount of impact your wealth is going to have in society is going to have to be greater. That's just how it is. Not because I want everyone to, be equal and make the same amount of money. No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. But if you do make more money, you're going to have to pay more taxes, which I'm fine with. But, the tax practices might need to be relooked at, because the amount of money that I make is definitely not the same. I should not be placed in the same tax bracket as someone 20 years ago making the same amount of money that I'm making now. I don't think that's fair. That should always be reevaluated all the fucking time. Then we won't have, we'll have maybe a middle class again if we're able to fix that. So, and then it's best to be prepared for enrollment day. So the ACA website had a lot of technical problems when it was first launched. That caused a bunch of people to be mad. Consumers have complained that signing up for the right family or business coverage can be trickier. And in recent years, the enrollment period has also been shortened. So that causes some issues. It's only from November 1st and December 15th. Businesses are cutting employee hours to avoid covering employees. So to make sure you're not a full-time employee, so that way they don't have to pay for your health care. And again, this is a business decision, not the government decision. The government implemented a law, and businesses decided to curtail around the law, like the Southern Democrats did when the amendments were passed to protect voters' rights. So same shit, just different objectives here. This was just to avoid having to pay more. So yeah, there's my stance. Anybody that wants to fight with me on that, fuck you. Yeah, go ahead, argue with me. Send it an email. Don't care. I'll fight you on it too. Obamacare is a step in the right direction. It doesn't do enough, though. In my opinion, healthcare should be free to everyone, and it would create a better society. Same with education, man. Education should be a right, not a privilege. Healthcare should be a right, not a privilege. There's a right to life, which I know goes against my pro-choice stance, but goddamn, the right to life is definitely a good thing. Anyways, continuing on, the Democratic Party also began to more openly embrace causes such as the LGBTQ rights, culminating in Obama's support for same-sex marriage and subsequent Supreme Court ruling in Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015, which made same-sex marriage legal across the United States. The Democrats' increasing advocacy for minority rights, women's rights, and immigration reform reflected the party's evolving base, which had become more diverse and progressive. Progressivism, right? This ideological shift was not without contention. Within the Democratic Party, debates over the extent of progressive policies and the best approaches to issues like healthcare and environment led to internal struggles between moderate and progressive factions. Again, more and more, because the more the moderate and progressive factions debate, the harder it is to seem like you are on the side of the Democratic Party if you're more moderate. Which is why I think a third party needs to come out and be the third big party in the U.S. It should just be the moderate party. And before you go posting this in r/enlightened centrism, I hate people there too, because they're, I don't know, just the way they talk about shit is very like, oh, look at this person being a fence rider, being, and they're going to laugh at both sides. It's like, no, I can have an opinion on policies that don't necessarily reflect Republican or Democratic ideals, right? And I would feel more represented by somebody who had a more moderate approach. Maybe they had some Republican policies here and some Democratic policies here, and like it would be great. See, in the middle is where we find like the best solutions and where the country can grow. When we agreed on a lot of things back during World War II, which unfortunately still included racism or a lot of shit, or like when they weren't fighting, the country boomed and experienced a great growth. And then FDR's like policies, if they were, the issue is, I think sometimes and by the way, here let me get to the end of the episode. I'll get into this, right? Okay. So the 2000s also saw changes in parties' geographic basis. The Republican Party made significant gains in the South and rural areas across the country, while the Democratic Party strengthened its hold on urban centers and the coast, further entrenching the rural-urban divide in American politics. The shifts in party bases had far-reaching implications for American political discourse and policymaking. The growing ideological divide led to heightened partisanship and gridlock in Congress, with both parties finding it increasingly difficult to reach across the aisle. This polarization has become a defining feature of modern American politics, affecting everything from Supreme Court nominations to immigration policy and climate change legislation. The 2000s set the stage for the political dynamics that continue to shape the United States, where deep-seated ideological differences influence the direction of the country's policies and the nature of its political debates. This was all started by Puritans and separatists arriving here in America, evolving into Federalists and Anti-Federalists, evolving then into the Republican Party of Lincoln and the Southern Democratic Party, which then switched into what I like to call the Democratic Party of LBJ and the Republican Party of Nixon. So, and that is where we are, and this quarrel continues to this day. And that is the end of today's historical quarrel. All right, everyone. You made it. Made it to the end of this beautifully long American history series. Probably most episodes we've really done for, well, I guess Rome. I could probably do like an entire separate podcast on just Rome. But this is kind of fun. Like I said at the beginning of this series, American history was always my least favorite subject in school. But over time, I've begun to realize how important it is to understanding political ideologies today and where my political stances align. Because growing up, my grandpa was like, "Oh yeah, the Republican Party is the good party. This is a party that freed the slaves. And, all these people are calling us racist, but we're the ones." And it's like, now I'm like, Grandpa. No, the Republican Party was not when I was a kid. At that point, Nixon had already done what Nixon did. Okay, he got the Southern Dixiecrats to be Republicans. He did a good job. And then Reagan cemented that shit, got more religious nut jobs to vote for him. And it became a numbers game on how to get certain types of people to vote for you. And that's all politics became. And I think we've lost here in America, and this is where I'm getting into my opinion, right? I think this political schism, this divide that has been created due to all these policies either working or not working or just being interfered and fucked with, is going to end up destroying our country, right? If not resolved and fixed. Because I think that's why I think that we need to have a third party come out and become the middle ground, become the, hey, this party is going to push for this reform on this side and this reform on this side. And no longer will politicians be constrained by party ideologies that become increasingly more and more polarized. Instead, they'll be, all they'll have to do is join the moderate party and then be like, hey, you know what? I think this is right, and I think this is right. And this might be a little bit of an ideal situation because I know, obviously, within the moderate party, there would be even more contentions and debates then on, separate things. And maybe, it cause another party to form and another party and another party. Like, oh, hey, like, I'm moderate, but I'm also kind of religious. So I want like this, policy to pass. But like, I disagree with the Republicans here, but I agree with like this. And it's like, in my opinion, that is better than just blindly following what the party's supposed stance needs to be to get the most voters in the electorate. Matter of fact, I think we should go back to when, if a state is divided enough, the electorate gets split. I don't know if that actually does still happen anymore. I have not seen it happen in elections that I've been alive for. But in all honesty, I think the electoral vote should just be that, like if it's split, this candidate gets X amount of electoral votes from here and the other candidate gets more electoral votes from there, which would probably solve some of the like where they can draw on the maps, like, hey, this is going to be my area now, and this is how I'm going to get revoted back into my Senate or congressman seat. Probably solve some of those issues. Well, not really, because they can just make sure that their voters vote for them because they know who all goes out to vote there. There needs to be term limits set on Congress and the Senate. There needs to be term limits set on everything. There needs to be an age limit set. I don't think anybody past the age of 65 has any fucking clue on what the actual issues are. I think if you're past the age of retirement, you grew up in a different culture, in a different setting than the people who are living in the country that you are creating and shaping. And you don't fully understand how the world works anymore past that age. I think once I hit age 65, I'm not going to know anything my kids are, experiencing. I'm not going to fully understand it. I may want to try and help, but I'm never going to have the same experiences they will. And that needs to be something that's understood. There are shared human experiences, and then there are very distinct human experiences. I will never understand what life was like for anybody that grew up in the 80s. I will never understand what life was like for anybody that grew up in the 60s. I will never understand what life is like for kids today with the constant fear of getting shot up in school. I don't understand that fear. And I live with the fear of my kids getting shot up when they go to school. That's scary, right? People from the 60s are like, that's more like a modern problem. The problem isn't guns. The problem is people. Like, I'm not going to say like guns are, getting rid of guns is a solution. I don't think that. I like having a gun. I think, home defense is necessary. The right to bear arms is a necessary thing. But the reasons some people give of like, oh, it's, so that way we can stand up to the government. No, you're not going to stand up to the government. They can nuke you. They can bomb you. Who gives a shit? I do think that maybe, just maybe we don't need certain types of guns. A shotgun, maybe a pistol or two, be just fine for home defense. I don't need a fucking AK, People aren't going to break into my house with an AK. And even if they do, a shotgun is going to work in my short range situation here, right? I don't need a fucking sniper rifle. Actually, rifles are okay too, because in single bolt action where you can't rapidly fire them and, murder a shit ton of people. Here's the thing, though. Bad guys are always going to be bad guys. They're always going to get a hold of weapons, too. No matter what, that's just going to happen. That's a reality of life, especially with America. That's the reality that we've created for ourselves here. So the solution now and never can be, the solution will never, ever be because of the, culture and what we've built here, is we can't get rid of guns. There'll always be black market deals. Guns is seen as like an American right, like a specific thing. I don't know. Gun control is such like a hot topic and hot button issue too. Because I grew up in a family where like we love guns, like we go out hunting. My uncles will always go out hunting. They, I love my uncles. I don't think they're bad people for having guns or wanting to keep their guns. They're not the ones going out shooting people for the most part. Like most people who own guns aren't going out shooting people. They're going out like either hunting, shooting animals, or they're just firing the gun because they like guns. And this idea of like, well, we have to give away that joy, that luxury to, keep our kids safe. I think that is a bit of fear mongering done on the left side of it, right? It's this idea of like, oh, okay, God, but there have been so many fucking school shootings to like an insane amount, and then like just mass shootings in general. It has ramped up a crazy amount in the U.S., and a lot of it comes from people feeling, it either comes from crazy people or some people just feeling like they're not being heard, which is a weird thing to think about. It's like these racist assholes or bigoted assholes who are like, this is my way of like fighting back, and they do it violently. And there's a violent pushback of a perceived oppression of their way of life, which is, again, also insane to me that, their way of life of being able to oppress people is now being oppressed. So they have to act out violently to make sure they can oppress people. It's great, right? It's a lot of fun. And then, so I don't know, my stance is I don't know the solution, right? It'd be great to be able to say like, hey, let's just get rid of all guns, but that's unrealistic. That's never going to fucking happen. And then, it's just not like, it'd probably take the military coming in, legit ripping away guns for people. And that would probably spark a civil war. Not going to lie. It would turn into guerrilla warfare, and then a bunch of innocent civilians would die in the ensuing chaos. So is it worth it? Is a civil war worth it to get rid of guns and oppress people who feel like that's a divine right of sorts? I don't know. I don't think so, personally. I don't think that's the right solution. I think higher people hate this stance, but I definitely think we should implement higher security protocols for our schools. Better. People want to defund the police, but police enforcement after we do some realignment and get rid of a bunch of racists who have been racist and were managed under other racists out of there. That'd be cool. That'd be real cool, because then maybe we'd have a good police force, people who actually want to serve and protect and take their job seriously, and not just view it as a way that they can go push people around to bully people. Because we all know cops like that, where they were definitely like the high school asshole, and like they got into the real world and they realized they had no value, so they became a cop and they felt powerful again. Like, it happens all the fucking time. But then there are a bunch of good cops. There are. I know a lot of good cops. So that isn't a solution either. I hate these extreme stances people take. It's getting ridiculous, That's why I think there needs to be a moderate party. And healthcare and the right to live, as I call it, is a basic human right. Fuck you if you disagree with me. Like, legit, fuck you. There's absolutely no fucking reason why healthcare should not be affordable in the US. Unless you just want to see people suffer and die. Yeah, you can fuck off if you have those thoughts. You can argue with me. I'll hear you out and I'll respond. I'll be respectful too. I'm just saying fuck you here because it is such like a hard stance with me. I've had family members. Luckily, my grandpa was able to afford treatment for her while she was going through cancer and chemo and all the medications she had to take. They were able to afford it. Luckily, there are plenty of people who cannot afford that shit, and plenty of kids die every year. Doctors are unable to, families are unable to afford treatments that would, at the very least, to help ease their pain. There are kids who have medication that they have to take or they will just die. Sometimes I view it as just a way of like American society just being so callous to then I don't know, just kill all the poor people until they're out, and like then they don't have to think about it because they're all dead. I don't know. I don't know what the whole idea is there. Is it just I don't want to have to deal with it because I'm not dealing with it. I'm not going to be ever in that stance because my family was rich and I was able to get a good education and therefore I was able to get a good job because my family was able to help set me up on that path. Or I wasn't born into poverty. I wasn't born to parents that abused drugs. And, I wasn't born into that. So why should I have to deal with people's problems who were born into that? Fuck that. It's like, okay, sure, you can just say that. But there are a ton of people who are born into poverty, born into terrible situations, and they are good people. They're good people who are just trying their best. And I don't think we as a society need to be so callous to them. But I don't know. It's a tough one. Maybe I should. I knew today's episode was going to be super political. If I pissed off enough of you, if all of you were Republican, I'm sorry. I hope you don't view me as too liberal. I mean, fuck, I said that we should probably be able to have guns. I know but like we should have, more security at schools. It's not turning the schools into a prison. It's just, making schools safer, in my opinion. Teachers don't need to have guns. They don't need to take that training. That's ridiculous. We should just have better security systems at school, which we have implemented quite a few policies there. But that's mostly up to the state's discretion because education is more of at a state level. There's less of federal oversight in education, and that should become a federal oversight. That should be something that the federal government is in control of. States should have no say in that. That's also something that we should all chip in and pay for as a society to help grow society. And then I don't know, do we can keep our guns? And yeah, mass shooters at like bars and shit, that's always a problem. But businesses, again, can afford to have security, have protection. Those people might have guns too. I don't know. It's getting hot button issue. It's a difficult issue to address completely. But that's how I view. That's how I view it, man. Like I like having a gun. I like being able to shoot it too. So I'm not going to go around shooting people, and I think most people don't. It's just the one or two. Unfortunately, it's the mass destruction that they can cause with shooting a bunch of people at once. That's why I don't need to have an automatic rifle. Like I don't need to have an AK. That's so dumb. I don't necessarily need to be able to have a fucking jet. Actually, like even if I had $11.2 billion to have an F-35, I should not be able to have an F-35. A weapon of that mass destruction, that level should never be able to be granted to a citizen, right? So, in a lot of ways, I just, like, if I'm going to have a gun, I should be able to have a gun for home defense. And if I want to go hunting, why the fuck do you need to have a crazy gun? You're not going to fight the government. I'm sorry. And even if enough of us all had crazy ass weapons, we're not going to fight the government. They're like, what? Should everyone have fucking nukes? Are you kidding me? The world would be destroyed if everyone had nukes. That's stupid. That is a stupid idea of like, well, maybe we should just let everyone have the same weapons the government does. No, no, there are too many stupid people to have that happen. And you know what? That's, I guess then people would be like, well, there's too many stupid people to have guns. Which I don't know, maybe, yeah, there is. But I think there's enough competent people that it hopefully isn't that much of an issue. And I will be devastated if anything ever happens to my kids at public school because of it. We are terrified of letting our sons, one is 3 and one is 1, going to a public school. I know it's unlikely to happen. I know it's just a lot of fear mongering, and the area that I live in most likely won't have happened. But it's just that, yeah, I don't know. Perception is everything, and when you are seeing that constantly, it is a problem for sure. So take that with as you will. Those are my thoughts and opinions on everything. That's kind of it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on everything. I'd love to read people's responses on political forums. Because I know I'm not 100% right. I know I'm not going to, that's the whole point of politics, right? I'm not going to have the answer that helps everyone, besides like fucking healthcare, dude. Why is that? It's not that hard. God damn. Maybe it takes money away from roads and other shit though. But like we can definitely find it. We can find a way to make people be able to afford it. I think when I did the math, at most, if we kept doctors at a good job rate, so it was still like a sought after industry, like, paid them $500,000 a year. Like every doctor made $500,000 a year, and that was just the standard. It became like a government, like they were working for the government essentially. They'd get their paycheck from the government. I think the American taxpayer only had to pay like $1,000 something extra, like in taxes in the year. So like people who get like their tax returns would maybe just have like $1,000 less, which is fine in my opinion. But people who make less, maybe small businesses would struggle. But again, if you're not a small business, if you're making over an X amount, a certain amount of that should be alleviated towards societal improvement. Because you live in a country where the society is benefiting you and your company, and you're able to live a wealthier lifestyle. You should be okay with benefiting society too, not just yourself. Okay, anyway, sorry. Okay, ending it. This is it for political shit. I probably, I don't know, I might bring up politics. I'll definitely bring up religion again, because religion impacts most of history, unfortunately. So when you hear me, get a little harder on religion, I didn't. On today's episode, I just brought up the whole fact that Puritans, separatists were big in the way that they viewed politics, and like the way they viewed their religion was very similar to how America does now. I just found it interesting. But religion will be brought up again. But politics, I'll try not to. So this will be the one episode where I go real hard in my stances. Who knows? My stances might change in 10 years. So fuck it. Who cares? Next week, we are going to be doing a true crime story, like an actual true crime story. I'm going to go over the story of Christian Grindel, some German serial killer who killed supposedly 964 people in the 1500s. It's going to be fun. I'm excited for it. And this time I'm going to do a lot better than the Dog of Montargis. So, because I'm going to, format it like a true crime podcast. So get ready for that. But it's going to be a history one. And then after this, we're probably just going to go back into more like wars and more little beefs and quibbles between people. So if you found value in today's episode, please leave a review, leave a like. Let me know what you thought in the review. Send me a message, share it with a friend, and you guys have a good one. And as you know, since I'm a chaos demon, keep on spreading the chaos. I am from the warp, and chaos must persist. So have a good one. Love you guys. Bye.